Story 1. My sister asked me to watch her house for 3 weeks while she was away, and I said yes the way you say yes to family before you've really thought about what it means. It was October, the kind of October where the light goes soft and low by 4 in the afternoon, and the trees on her street had started letting go of their leaves one at a time without any wind to blame it on. Her house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, the last one before the road gives up and turns into trees. It's an older house, the kind built when people still wanted a little distance between themselves and the neighbors. 2 stories. A porch that sags a little on the left side. A basement she'd always told me not to bother with, because the light down there had never worked right and the stairs were steep. And there was nothing down there anyway but boxes and the water heater and the smell of a place that never fully dries out. I got there on a Sunday evening. She'd already left. The key was under the 3rd flower pot from the door, exactly where she said it would be, and the house was warm when I let myself in, which surprised me, because I'd expected it to feel closed up. Empty houses have a particular stillness to them. A held breath. This one didn't have that. It felt lived in. Recently lived in. There was a mug in the sink, rinsed but not washed, sitting upside down on the drying rack. There were slippers by the back door. The thermostat in the hall read 68 degrees, and when I put my hand near the vent, warm air was moving through it, steady and quiet. I told myself she must have left later than she said, that she'd made herself a cup of tea before the airport, and the heat had simply been running all day. That's the thing about a house you're new to. It gives you 100 small strangenesses in the first hour, and every one of them has an explanation. And you take each explanation gratefully, because the alternative is to stand in someone else's kitchen at dusk, feeling like you've walked in on something. So I unpacked. I put my things in the guest room at the top of the stairs, the one with the window that looks out over the backyard and the tree line beyond it. I made myself dinner from what she left in the fridge, which was more than I expected. Fresh things. A carton of milk that didn't expire for another week. A loaf of bread with only 2 slices gone. I ate at her kitchen table and listened to the house settle around me, the ticks and small groans that every old house makes as the temperature drops, and I thought, this won't be so bad. 3 weeks of quiet. 3 weeks of somebody else's life, borrowed and soft around the edges. That first night, I slept fine. I want to be honest about that because of what comes later. The first night, I slept like a stone, and I woke up to gray morning light and the sound of birds, and for a moment I didn't know where I was, and then I did, and it was fine. It was the second morning that I noticed the mug. Not the one in the sink, a different one. It was on the counter by the coffee maker, and there was coffee in it. An inch of coffee gone cold, a skin forming on the surface the way it does. And I stood there looking at it, because I don't drink coffee. I never have. It gives me a headache and a kind of hollow, jittery feeling I've never learned to like. I'd bought myself tea at the store on the way in. The coffee maker wasn't even something I'd touched. I picked the mug up. It was cold. Whatever had been in it had been there a while. And I did the thing you do. I ran through it. I built the explanation. My sister. She'd made coffee before she left, and I'd simply not seen this mug the first night, tucked as it was behind the paper towels, in the shadow of the cabinet. 2 days old then. Coffee. 2 days old. That was all. But it bothered me in a way I couldn't put down, because I'd cleaned that counter the first night. I remembered doing it. I remembered wiping it down after dinner because there'd been crumbs, and I moved the paper towels to wipe under them, and there had been no mug. I was almost sure. Almost. And that word, almost, is where these things live. That's the whole country they come from. Almost sure. Probably nothing. You must have just missed it. I poured the coffee out. I washed the mug and put it away, up in the cabinet with the others, and I noticed then that there were exactly 11 mugs on that shelf, and they didn't match. They were the accumulated mugs of a life, a chipped one from a diner, one with a faded cartoon, one that said, "World's Okayest Gardener," And I thought about how a house holds all these small objects that mean nothing to you and everything to somebody. And the days went on. I found a rhythm. I worked in the mornings at the kitchen table, my laptop open, the light coming in slow and golden. I took walks in the afternoon, down to where the road ended and the trees began, and I never went in very far, because something about the way the light died at the edge of those trees made me want to stay in the open. In the evenings I read, or I watch something on our television, wrapped in a blanket on our couch, and the house held me the way a house does when you've been in it a week. And it started to learn the shape of you. But the small things kept coming. The back door, which I locked every night, which I was certain I locked, because I have that particular anxiety, the kind that makes you go back and check twice. That door was unlocked one morning. Not open, just unlocked. The little brass knob of the deadbolt turned to the side, and I stood there with my tea going cold in my hand, and I turned it back and forth, locked, unlocked, listening to the soft clunk of the bolt. And I told myself I must have forgotten that the one night in my life I forgot to lock a door was this one. It happens. People forget. The guest bed in the other room, the one I wasn't using, the one down the hall from mine, was rumpled one afternoon when I walked past it. The door of that room was usually closed. I kept it closed, without really deciding to, the way you close doors to rooms you're not using. But it was open, and the bed inside had the look of a bed someone had lain down on, not slept in, just laying on top of the covers for an hour in the middle of the day. A body-shaped dent in the comforter, a dip in one of the pillows. And I stood in the doorway and I looked at it, and my skin did something. A slow, cool prickle at the back of my neck, and I made myself walk in and smooth the comforter flat and fluff the pillow, and I told myself the cat. There was no cat. My sister doesn't have a cat. I don't know why I said it, even to myself. The cat. Some animal shape my mind reached for. Some soft explanation. Because the true shape of the thing was too large to look at directly, and so I gave it fur and 4 legs. And I smoothed the bed, and I closed the door, and I went back downstairs, and I did not think about it. I was very good, those first 2 weeks, at not thinking about it. I had a lot of practice by then. It was the smell that finally made me stop pretending. I'd gone down to the basement. I know. She'd told me not to bother, and I hadn't. For 12 days, I hadn't so much as opened the door at the top of those stairs. But the washing machine was down there, and I'd run out of clean clothes, and there was no help for it. So I opened the door, and I reached in and flipped the switch that she'd told me didn't work, and to my surprise, a light came on down below. Weak, yellow, but on. And I went down those steep stairs one at a time with my basket of laundry, and the snow came up to meet me halfway down. It wasn't a bad smell exactly. That's what made it strange. It wasn't rot or damp or anything I could have named as wrong. It was a warm smell, a human smell. The smell a room has when someone has been sleeping in it that close, slept in warmth, skin and breath, and the particular staleness of a body at rest through a long night. It was the smell of my own guest room in the morning before I opened the window, and it was down here, in a basement my sister had told me was nothing but boxes and the water heater, a basement no one was supposed to have set foot in. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with my laundry basket held against my chest like something I could hide behind, and I looked at the shape of that basement in the weak yellow light, and I saw the boxes stacked along the walls the way she'd said, and I saw the water heater in the corner ticking softly to itself. And I saw, against the far wall, in the deepest part of the room where the light didn't quite reach, that someone had made a bed. I didn't scream. I want you to understand that, because I've thought about it since, about how in the movies people scream, and I didn't. I just stood there at the bottom of the stairs with my laundry basket, and I looked at the bed someone had made against the far wall, and a great calm came over me that I've never fully trusted since. The calm of a mind that has decided, very quickly and without asking you, that it is not going to fall apart right now, because falling apart right now would be dangerous. It was a real bed, not a mattress on the floor, not a pile of blankets, but a bed made with care. There was a folded quilt at the foot of it, one of those heavy handmade quilts, and the pillow at the head had a case on it, and the whole thing was tucked and squared away the way my grandmother used to make a bed, hospital corners, everything smoothed. Beside it, on an overturned crate, there was a glass of water, half full, and a book face down, open to hold its place, the way you leave a book when you mean to come back to it. I made myself walk closer. I don't know where the courage came from. I think it wasn't courage at all. I think it was that same fast calm making decisions for me. Because I needed to know, and knowing felt safer than not knowing, even though it wasn't. Even though it was the opposite of safe. I walked across that basement floor, past the boxes with my sister's handwriting on them, kitchen and books and winter, and I stood over the bed, and I looked down at it. The pillow had a dent in it. The center of the pillow, pressed down, the way a pillow holds the memory of a head for a little while after you've lifted it. And when I put my hand flat against the quilt, against the place where a body would lie, it was warm. Not warm like a person was there a second ago. Warm like a bed is warm in the morning. That lingering animal warmth that a body leaves behind and that fades so slowly you could almost believe the bed itself was alive and breathing. Someone had been lying here. Recently. Within the hour. And they had gotten up and folded nothing, disturbed nothing, and gone somewhere else in the house while I made my tea and read my book and thought I was alone. I understood it all at once then. The way you understand a picture that's been a smear of shapes and then suddenly resolves into a face. The coffee I didn't drink. The door I was sure I'd locked. The guest bed with the body shape pressed into it. The one I'd smoothed flat and blamed on a cat that didn't exist. Someone was living in this house. Someone had been living in this house the entire time I'd been in it, moving through the rooms I wasn't in, sleeping down here in the dark, coming up at night, and they had been so quiet, so careful, so practiced at it, that for 12 days I had explained them away one small kindness at a time. I had done their work for them. Every time I said probably nothing, I had helped them stay hidden. I went back up the stairs. I did not run, though everything in me wanted to. I went up one step at a time, and I did not turn my back fully on that corner. And when I reached the top, I closed the basement door, and I stood in the kitchen with my heart going, and I called my sister. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. She was somewhere over an ocean, or in a country where her phone didn't work, or simply asleep in a hotel with the ringer off, living her 3 weeks of somewhere else while I stood in her kitchen learning what her house had been holding. I called again. Voicemail again. I texted her, and I tried to make the text sound calm because some stubborn part of me still didn't want to be the sister who overreacted, the sister who called the police about a warm pillow. I typed, "Hey, quick question. Has anyone else been staying at the house? Like a neighbor with a key or something?" And I looked at that message for a long time before I sent it, and even as I sent it, I knew it was the wrong size for the thing it was about. It was a teacup held up to a flood. She didn't answer. I made myself eat something because I'd read somewhere that you should. That shock burns through you and you have to put something back. And I stood at the counter and ate crackers I didn't taste, and I thought about what to do. The sensible thing was to leave, to get in my car and drive to a motel and call someone in the daylight. And I would have. I think I really would have. But it was already dark by then, full dark. The early dark of late October, and my car was in the driveway on the far side of the house. And to get to it, I would have to walk through rooms, past doorways, down the porch steps, into the open. And the thought of moving through the house now that I knew, now that I couldn't unknow, was worse than the thought of staying still. Isn't that a strange thing about fear? Sometimes it doesn't make you run. Sometimes it just makes you very, very still, like an animal in the grass, certain that motion is the thing that will get you seen. So I stayed. God help me, I stayed. I told myself I'd leave first thing in the morning. I told myself that whoever it was had had 12 days to hurt me, and hadn't, that they wanted to stay hidden more than they wanted anything else, that as long as I didn't corner them, didn't force it, I could get through one more night. I told myself a great many things standing in that kitchen, and I believed about half of them, which was enough. I did not sleep in the guest room. I went into the living room, and I sat on the couch with all the lamps on, every light in the house on, and I pulled the blanket over my knees and I poked my back against the arm of the couch so that I could see both doorways, the one to the kitchen and the one to the hall. And I sat there and I watched and I listened. The house talked the way it always did. The ticks and the settling, the furnace coming on with its soft roar and going off again. But now every sound had a second possible author, and I lay there sorting them. That's the house, that's the house, that's the furnace, and waiting for the one that wasn't, the one that would be a footstep, a floorboard taking a weight that wasn't the house's own weight. It came a little after 2. Not a footstep. Softer than that. It was the sound of the basement door opening. That particular sound I'd made myself an hour before. The small click of the latch and the long, low sigh of the hinges. And then nothing. A nothing so complete that I stopped breathing to make my own silence match it. And then, so quiet I might have invented it, the sound of someone moving through the kitchen. Not creeping. That was the worst of it somehow. Not the careful, guilty creep of an intruder, but the easy, unhurried movement of a person in their own home in the dark. Someone who knew where the table was and where the chair was and how to cross the room, without touching either. Someone who had crossed this room in the dark 1,000 times. I lay on that couch under the blanket with all the lights on, and I listened to someone I couldn't see move through the kitchen 20 feet away, and I understood that the lights didn't matter to them. That was the thing that finally reached all the way into me and turned something cold. They weren't hiding from the light. They had never been hiding from the light. They'd been hiding from me, specifically from being seen by me, and the lights being on changed nothing, because they knew this house so much better than I did. They knew every angle of sight and every blind spot. They knew exactly where to stand so that a woman on the couch with her back to the arm and her eyes on the doorways would not see them. The movement stopped. In the kitchen, just out of sight, past the edge of the doorway, it stopped. And I felt the way you feel a person's attention even across a room, even with your eyes closed. I felt them turn toward the living room, toward me. I felt myself be looked at, and a voice, low, unbothered, almost kind, said, "You found the bed." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My whole body had become a held breath, and the voice waited in the dark of the kitchen doorway, patient, in no hurry at all, and after a while it went on as though I had answered, as though we were simply two people talking late at night, which in a way we were. "I keep it out of the way down there," it said. "I know it's a shock. There isn't a good way to find it. I've thought about that. There isn't a way I could leave a note that wouldn't be worse." I found my voice, finally, though it came out small and strange. "Who are you?" A soft sound. Not quite a laugh. The sound a person makes when you've asked a question that's much bigger than you know. "I've been here longer than she has," the voice said. "Your sister. I was here before she signed the papers. I was here before the family before her, and the one before them. I don't own it. I want to be clear about that. I've never once thought of it as mine. But I've been in it longer than any of them, and I expect I'll be in it longer than her too." "That's not possible," I said. And even as I said it, I heard how thin it was. How it was just another version of probably nothing. The same reflex I'd been running for 12 days, still trying to work, still trying to make the world small enough to live in. "Isn't it?" it said, not unkindly. "You've been alone in this house for 12 days. Or you thought you were. Which is easier to believe." I couldn't answer that. Because it was right. I had been alone and I had not been alone, and both of those had been true at the same time, and I had chosen the one that let me sleep. "Your sister knows," it said, and this was the part that went into me deepest, deeper than the warm pillow, deeper than the voice in the dark. "She's known for years. So did the ones before her. You learned to leave the basement alone. You learned to make a little extra coffee and not ask who drinks it. You learned to lock the door twice and find it open and just lock it again without letting yourself think about it. It's not so hard once you stop fighting it. Most people never even have to know they're doing it. She wasn't hiding it from you to be cruel. She was hiding it from you the way she hides it from herself. You don't tell the person watching the house. You just hope they're the kind who explains things away. A pause. You were. For 12 days you were. That's rare. That's almost a gift. Being able to do that. Most people aren't so good at it. And I understood. Then, the true shape of the thing, the whole terrible reasonableness of it, it wasn't going to hurt me. It had never been going to hurt me. It didn't need to. It needed only to be tolerated, to be unlooked at, to be folded into the ordinary life of the house the way the furnace was, the way the sag in the porch was, the way the smell of the basement was. One more thing you stopped noticing after a week. It had outlasted family after family, not by force, but by patience, by being so quiet and so reasonable and so easy to explain away that people simply learned to live alongside it and pass the arrangement down without ever quite saying it aloud. A tenant you inherit with the house. A tenant nobody signs for. I'm going to leave in the morning, I said. I know, it said. That's fine, you should. It's not your house to learn to live in. And then, gently, the way you'd tell someone something for their own good, but you'll want to lock your own doors now. You'll want to make a little extra coffee. You've got the habit in you now, you see. Once you learn how to not see a thing, you never quite lose it. It's a door that only opens the one way. A last soft sound, almost tender. Sleep if you can. I won't come in. I never have. And it didn't. That's the thing I can't make anyone understand. Nothing happened. I lay on that couch with all the lights on until the windows went gray, and nothing came through the doorway, and when the sun was fully up, I got my bag and I walked through the house, and the basement door was closed, and the kitchen was empty. A single clean mug sitting upside down on the drying rack, and I got in my car and I drove. And I did not look back at the house at the end of the cul-de-sac where the road gives. My sister came home. She thanked me. She asked if everything was fine, and I looked at her for a long moment, and I saw, in the way she held my eyes and then let them go, that she was asking me a different question than the words, and I gave her the answer she needed. I said everything was fine, and something passed between us, some old quiet thing, handed from her to me the way it had been handed to her, and neither of us said a single word about it, and I have never once, in all the years since, asked her about the basement. I went home to my own apartment, my small, bright, top-floor apartment with its good locks and its single bedroom and its complete lack of a basement, and for a long time, I was fine. Months. I told myself it was over, that it had stayed where it belonged, that whatever lived in my sister's house lived in my sister's house and had nothing to do with me. But last week, I made a pot of coffee. I don't drink coffee. I've told you that. It gives me a headache and that hollow, jittery feeling I've never learned to like. But last week, I stood in my kitchen and I made a full pot without quite deciding to. And I poured a cup and I set it on the counter by the sink. And I left it there. And I went to bed. And in the morning, the cup was empty, rinsed, sitting upside down on the drying rack. And I stood there, looking at it in the gray morning light, and I felt that fast calm come over me, the one I've never trusted since. The one that decides for you that you are not going to fall apart right now. And I did not ask myself who drank it. I just made a little more. Story 2. Every night at the same time. My father came to live with me the winter after my mother died, and for the first few months, the only strange thing about it was how ordinary it felt. How quickly a man who had been the largest figure of my childhood folded down into the small routines of my spare bedroom. His pills in a weekly organizer on the dresser, his slippers by the radiator, his one good coat hanging in my hall closet next to mine. He was 79. He was tired in the way that grief makes people tired, a tiredness that isn't about sleep, and he'd gotten quiet, which frightened me more than anything, because my father had never been a quiet man. He'd been a talker, a fixer, a man who filled a kitchen just by standing in it. Now he sat at my kitchen table in the mornings with his hands around a cup of tea and looked out the window at the parking lot and the bare trees beyond it, and I would catch myself watching him and grieving him a little, even though he was right there. because the man at the table was a smaller, softer draft of the man I'd grown up under, and I didn't yet know which parts of the old one were coming back and which were gone for good. I told myself it was an adjustment for both of us. I'd lived alone for a long time, and now I didn't, and there's a particular intimacy to sharing your home with a parent when you're grown, a reversal that neither of you quite knows how to hold. I learned his habits. He liked the heat higher than I did. He couldn't abide a dripping faucet. He went to bed early, by 9 most nights, and he was a light sleeper, up 2 or 3 times before dawn, which he apologized for, as though the sounds of an old man moving carefully through a dark apartment were an imposition I hadn't already forgiven 100 times over. It was maybe 6 weeks in that I first noticed the time. I'm a light sleeper myself, always have been, and I'd wake sometimes in the small hours to the sound of him up and about, the flush of the toilet, the tap running, the soft shuffle of his slippers, and I never thought anything of it. But one night I woke and lay there, and the sounds were different. Not the bathroom, not the kitchen. It was the sound of my father's bedroom door opening, and then his slow footsteps down the short hall, and then the front door, the deadbolt turning, the chain sliding, the door opening onto the cold outer landing of my building, and then nothing. No footsteps going down, no footsteps coming back. Just the door, open, and my father standing in it, I assumed, though I couldn't see, and the cold air of the January night beginning to creep along the floor to find me under my own door. I got up. I found him standing on the landing in his pajamas and his good coat thrown over them, and he was facing out toward the stairwell in the dark, and he was very still, and his lips were moving, not talking. Not to me, not to anyone, just moving, the way lips move when a person is counting or praying or working through something they've said so many times it no longer needs sound. "Dad," I said, "Dad, it's freezing. Come inside." And he turned to me, and his face was perfectly clear, perfectly present. None of the fog I'd been dreading, no confusion, no "where am I?" He looked at me the way he'd looked at me my whole life, and he said, "It's all right. I'm just finishing." And he stepped back inside, and he closed the door, and he did the locks in order, deadbolt, chain, and he patted my shoulder as he passed me and went back to bed. And I stood in my hallway with my heart going, telling myself it was sundowning. It was grief. It was the medication. It was an old man wandering in the night, the way old men do. I looked at the clock when I got back to my room. It was 11 minutes past 3. I didn't think about the time, not really, not then. 3 in the morning is just the hour that fear keeps. Everyone knows that. If a thing is going to be strange, it will be strange at 3, so I filed it there, under the ordinary strangenesses of the very old and the recently bereaved, and I resolved to call his doctor, and I went back to sleep. But it happened again, not the next night, 3 nights later, and then again, 4 nights after that. And it was always the same. The door opening, the coat, the landing, the stillness, the moving lips. And it was always, when I got up and looked at the clock, 11 minutes past 3. Not 3, not 3:15. 11 minutes past 3, precisely, every time, as though he were keeping an appointment that had been set long ago and never once rescheduled. That was the detail that got under the skin of my easy explanations. Because dementia doesn't keep time. Sundowning doesn't check its watch. A confused old man wandering in the night wanders whenever the confusion takes him, not at the same exact minute, over and over, with the precision of a man catching a train. The wandering I could explain, the clock I couldn't, and so, the way you do, I stopped trying to explain the clock and started trying not to look at it, which is its own kind of choice, and one I'd get better at than I ever wanted to be. I did call the doctor. He said the things doctors say: grief, disruption, the sleep architecture of the elderly. We can try a low dose of something to help him stay down through the night. I filled the prescription. It did nothing. On the pill, my father slept heavier in every part of the night except one. At 11 minutes past 3, on the pill or off it, he rose. The medication that flattened the rest of his sleep into a dreamless wait had no hold at all on that single appointment. He came up out of a drugged sleep as cleanly as a man surfacing from water, and he went to the door, and he stood, and his lips moved, and then he went back down. I started, God help me, to watch for it. I'd lie awake in the dark on the nights I sensed it coming, though I couldn't have told you how I sensed it, and I'd listen for his door, and I'd get up and stand at the end of the hall where he couldn't see me, and I'd watch him at the open door with the cold pouring in past him, his back to me, his coat over his pajamas, his lips going, and I'd feel the two things war in me. The daughter who wanted to take his arm and lead him. One night I got close enough to hear. I came down the hall in my socks, slow, keeping to the side where the floor didn't creak, and I got within a few feet of him, closer than I'd ever been while it was happening, and I held my breath and I listened to my father's moving lips, and what he was saying, over and over, low and even and worn smooth as a stone in a river, was this. Not this one. Not tonight. Not this one. I asked him about it in the daylight, at the kitchen table, where hard things are easier to say. I told him I'd heard him. I told him what he'd been saying, and I watched my father's face do something I'd never seen it do in all my life, which was to grow careful. My father had never been careful with me. Blunt, yes, and stubborn, and sometimes wrong at the top of his lungs, but never careful, never weighing what I could hold. He weighed it now. He looked at me for a long moment over his cup of tea, and then he said, "Your mother never wanted you to know about it. She thought it might skip you." "It skipped some." "Know about what, Dad?" "The 3 o'clock," he said, as if that were a thing, a named thing, a chore on a list. "The 3 o'clock. Like the laundry. Like the taxes." And then he wouldn't say any more, not that morning, only that it was nothing for me to worry about, that he had it handled, that he'd had it handled for 11 years, and he'd handle it a while yet. 11 years. My mother had been gone 4 months. So whatever this was, it hadn't started with her death. It had started 11 years before, and I did the arithmetic without wanting to. And 11 years before was the year my grandmother died, my mother's mother, the winter we'd all driven up to the old house in the snow. And I remembered almost nothing of it except that my mother had come home from that trip. Changed in a way no one talked about, quieter, and that she'd started. I remembered now, getting up in the night. My father used to joke about it, her wanderings, and she'd never laughed. It passes down. That was the shape of it, and I felt it settle over me the way I'd felt the shape of the thing in my sister's house settle, that same sick click of a smear resolving into a face. It passes down. My grandmother, and then my mother, and then, when my mother died, my father, because he'd been beside her and he'd learned it and someone had to. And it had a time. And it had words. And it had, I was beginning to understand, a purpose, which was the part I still couldn't see the edges of, the part that lived behind the phrase, not this one, the phrase that implied a choosing, that implied there was a this one and a some other one, that implied that at 11 minutes past 3, every few nights, something came to the threshold of wherever the keeper slept and looked. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded then, sitting in my sunlit kitchen with my ordinary life around me, my job to get to and my bills to pay, and my perfectly reasonable modern mind. I told myself my father was an old man building a story to make sense of a broken sleep. I told myself grief does strange things, that he'd woven my grandmother and my mother into a private mythology because the alternative, that they were simply gone, was unbearable. I told myself all of it, and then 11 minutes past 3 would come, and my father would rise out of his medicated sleep like a man answering a phone and go to the door and stand and refuse, and I would stop telling myself anything at all. He got weaker through February. It wasn't the 3 o'clock that did it, or I don't think it was. I think it was only that he was 79 and grieving, and February is the month that takes the old. But he got weaker and slower, and there were mornings he couldn't get his hands to work the pill organizer, and I'd do it for him, and neither of us would say what we were both thinking, which was that the door was going to become a problem, that a night was coming when he would not be able to rise, and that he was afraid of that night in a way he had never in my life been afraid of anything. My father, who'd faced down every hard thing with his jaw set, was afraid of 11 minutes past 3, not for himself, I slowly understood, but of what it would mean to miss it. "You have to wake me," he told me one evening, gripping my wrist with a hand that had gone to paper and bone. "If I don't get up, you hear me. You wake me. Every time. It doesn't matter how deep I'm under. You get me to that door. Dad, what happens if you don't?" And he looked at me, and the fear in his face was so old, so much older than him, that it seemed to come from somewhere behind him, from my mother and her mother and back, and he said, "It takes the one it came for, and it doesn't come for me." He didn't have to finish. I felt the whole weight of it land. It doesn't come for me. It never came for the keeper. The keeper was safe. That was the terrible mercy of the arrangement. The keeper stood in the door and was passed over precisely because they stood in the door. It came for the ones asleep behind them. It came for the household. It came, he did not say, but I heard it, for me. The night it happened, I woke on my own, before my alarm, before his door, woke into a dark that felt wrong, thick, listening. And I knew, the way I'd learned to know, that it was coming. I looked at my phone, 9 minutes past 3, and I got up and I went to my father's room to wake him, to get him to the door as he'd made me swear, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and he was so deeply asleep, so far down, his breath slow and thin, and I shook him and said, "Dad, Dad, it's time," and he did not wake. He did not wake. And the minutes were moving. I could feel them moving, and I stood over my sleeping father in the dark with my heart trying to climb out of me. And the choice came down on me all at once with no time to refuse it. I could keep shaking him and lose the minutes and let whatever this was find the door unattended. Or I could go myself. I went myself. I walked down the short hall in my socks to my own front door, and I turned the deadbolt and slid the chain and opened it onto the cold, dark landing of my building. And the January air came in around me, and I stood where my father had stood, facing out into the stairwell and the dark below it. And I did not know the words. I only knew the shape of them, and 11 minutes past 3 arrived like a held note finally struck. And something in the dark of the stairwell, something I could not see and would spend the rest of my life grateful that I could not see, went still and turned and gave me its attention, the way a room's whole air changes when someone in it looks at you. And I understood that it was deciding, that it was looking at me in the doorway and looking past me at my sleeping father down the hall and deciding, in the way it decided every few nights, which of us it had come for. And I opened my mouth, and out of me, in a voice I didn't recognize, worn smooth as a stone in a river, came the words. "Not tonight," I said to the dark. "Not this one." The dark held. That's the only way I know how to say it. The attention that had turned toward me, that had been weighing me and my father in some scale I couldn't see, it held for a long moment after I spoke, and then it withdrew, the way a tide withdraws, without hurry, without offense, simply finished for the night. The cold in the stairwell became only cold. The dark became only dark. And I stood there in my socks with the words still in my mouth. And after a while I understood that it was over, that whatever had come had gone, and that I had turned it, and that I was still standing. I closed the door. Deadbolt. Chain. My hands knew the order without my telling them, and that frightened me more than anything that had happened, that my hands already knew. I went back to my father's room, and he was breathing, slow and thin, deep under, and I sat on the edge of his bed until the window went gray, watching him breathe, and I did not wake him. And in the morning he woke on his own and looked at me sitting there, and he knew. He didn't ask. He just knew, the way my sister knew, the way these things are known in families without a single word being spent on them. He reached out and put his paper and bone hand over mine, and he said, So it's yours now. And there was grief in it. Real grief. The grief of a father handing his child a weight he'd have carried to the grave to spare her. But under the grief, and this is the part I've never told anyone, under the grief, there was relief. He was tired. He'd been tired for 11 years. And now he could set it down. He died in the second week of March. Not at 3 in the morning. Not taken. He died at 4 in the afternoon in a chair by the window with the weak spring sun on his face and a cup of tea going cold in his hands. The most ordinary death a man can have. The death the 3 o'clock had bought him by passing him over year after year while he stood in the door. I've thought about that a great deal since, that the keeper is the one who gets to die in the daylight. That the reward for standing between the dark and everyone you love is a quiet chair and a cup of tea and no appointment at the end. It's not nothing, that reward. It's more than most people get. I try to remember that, because it's mine now. It has been mine for going on 9 years. I don't fight it anymore. That was the hardest part and the shortest. In the end, the fighting, the calling of doctors, the searching for the explanation that would let me put it down. There is no putting it down. It skips some, my father said, and it hadn't skipped me. And once you know, it hasn't skipped you. There's no unknowing it, no door that opens the other way. So I've made my peace with the 3 o'clock. I go to bed early now, the way he did, and I wake in the small hours the way he did. And every few nights, on the nights when the dark comes in thick and listening, I rise and I put my coat over my pajamas and I go to my door and I open it and I stand and I say the words, "Not tonight, not this one." And the thing weighs me and weighs whoever is sleeping in my house or my building or my care, and it withdraws and I close the locks in their order and I go back to bed. And in the morning I make my tea and I live my ordinary life. And no one who passes me on the street would ever guess that I am the reason they woke up. I've come to find a kind of peace in it. That's the thing I most want you to understand. The thing that took me years to say even to myself. It isn't only fear. Somewhere along the way it stopped being only fear and became something closer to purpose, closer even to love. Standing in that door in the cold, refusing the dark on behalf of people who will never know I did it. My grandmother felt it, I think, and my mother and my father in his last tired years. You'd have to keep doing it. You couldn't do it on fear alone for a lifetime. Derangement doesn't survive on fear. It survives on the fact that when the weight comes down on you, when you finally understand what standing in that door protects, you find that you're willing. That you'd rather be the one who's tired than the one who's taken. That's how it passes. Not by force, by love, handed down generation to generation, in the dark, at 11 minutes past 3. I'm getting older now myself. I notice it in my knees on the cold nights going to the door. I notice it in how long it takes me to come all the way up out of sleep when the dark comes calling. And I've started to do a thing I swore I never would. A thing I hate myself for. A little, and can't stop. At the holidays, when the family comes, my sister and her kids, my brother, all of them loud and warm and ordinary around my table, I find myself watching the young ones. The way my father watched me, I find myself measuring which of them is quiet, which of them sleeps badly, which of them has that light sleeper's wariness that I had, that my mother had. I find myself thinking, not with fear now, but with something worse, something almost tender, thinking, it will have to be one of you. When I can't rise anymore, when the night comes that I stay under, it will pass to whoever is closest, whoever has learned it, whoever stands beside me at the end. And last week, my niece, who is 19, who sleeps badly, who has always slept badly, sat up late with me after the others had gone to bed, and she said, out of nowhere, in a small voice, "Aunt, do you ever wake up at the same time every night? Like your body has an appointment?" And I looked at her for a long moment across my kitchen table. And I said, "No, sweetheart, I don't know what you mean. God forgive me. I have a few good years left in me yet. Let her have them too." Story 3. The Recordings. When my marriage ended and I moved out of the house we'd raised our kids in, there was a message waiting in my email that I almost deleted without reading. It was from the company that had run our home cameras. 4 of them, one at the front door and one over the driveway and 2 inside. The kitchen and the playroom. Cameras we'd put in years ago when the kids were small, and the world felt like it was full of reasons to watch your own front door. The message said the account was being closed, since the service address was no longer active, and that our stored footage, 7 years of it, would be permanently deleted in 30 days unless we downloaded it first. 7 years. I hadn't thought about those cameras in a long time. They'd become part of the wallpaper of the house, the little black eyes in the corners of rooms that you stop seeing after a week. But the thought of 7 years of my family simply being erased, all those ordinary mornings and homecomings and Christmas mornings, caught in the wide fisheye of a doorbell cam, undid something in me. I was in a small apartment then, alone for the first time in 18 years, the kids splitting their weeks between 2 houses, and the nights were very long, so I downloaded it. All of it. Terabytes. It took 2 days. And when it was done, I had, sitting on a drive on my kitchen table, the complete surveilled record of my old life, and nothing to do with my evenings but watch it. I told myself it was healthy. Closure, that word everyone uses. I told myself I'd make a little montage of the good moments for the kids, the milestones, the first days of school captured by the driveway cam, the birthday parties in the kitchen. And at first, that's what it was. I'd pour a glass of wine and open a folder labeled with a year and scrub through the endless still hours until motion bloomed on the screen. And there we'd be, younger, together, a family that still thought it was permanent, moving through rooms I'd never live in again. It hurt in a way that felt necessary, the way pressing a bruise feels necessary. I did it most nights. It was in the folder from 4 years back that I first saw it. And I didn't see it. That's the thing. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I was watching a clip from the kitchen camera. An ordinary weekday morning. The kids at the counter eating cereal. My ex-husband at the coffee maker. Me somewhere off-frame packing lunches. All of us in the loud, ordinary chaos of a school morning. I'd watched it for the kids, for their small faces. And I'd scrubbed past it and moved on. And then something made me scrub back. Some snag in the corner of my attention that I couldn't name. The way you walk past a room and something's different and you can't say what. I watched it again. The kids. The counter. The cereal. My ex at the coffee maker. And there, in the far corner of the frame, in the dark rectangle of the doorway that led to the hall, in a part of the kitchen no one was looking at, and no one had reason to look at, there was a shape. A vertical shape, a little darker than the dark around it, about the height of a person, standing just inside the hallway where the light didn't reach. Not moving. The kids moved. My ex moved. The steam moved off the coffee. The shape did not move. It stood in the doorway to the hall, and it faced the kitchen, and it was as still as a coat on a hook. And of course, that's what I thought. A coat on a hook. There was a hook on the wall just inside that hallway, I remembered it, and a coat on a hook in a dark doorway will read as a figure, everyone knows that. It's the oldest trick your eyes play. I even felt a little foolish for the way my heart had picked up. A coat. I scrubbed forward to see it resolve, to catch the moment the light shifted and it became, obviously, boringly, a coat. The clip ended before it resolved. Motion clips were 90 seconds. But I found the next one, 11 minutes later, same camera, the kitchen empty now, everyone gone to school and work, the morning light fuller, and I looked at the doorway to the hall. The shape was still there. And in the fuller light, I could see the hook on the wall. I could see it clearly. And there was no coat on it. The hook was empty. The shape stood beside it, a little in front of it, in the doorway, in an empty house, at 8:40 in the morning. And there was no one home to cast it, and nothing there to be it. and it faced the kitchen, and it did not move for the full 90 seconds until the clip ran out. I sat at my kitchen table in my small apartment, and I felt the wine go sour in me. And I did what I have done my whole life, what I think most of us do. I began to build the thing that would let me close the drive and go to bed. It was a smudge on the lens. It was a trick of the compression. Those cameras made artifacts sometimes, blocks of dark where the light was low. It was a shadow from the window, thrown long by the morning sun. Any of these, all of these. I had a dozen of them, and I laid them over the shape one at a time like blankets, and not one of them covered it, because a smudge on the lens doesn't appear in one doorway and nowhere else. And a compression artifact doesn't have shoulders, and a shadow doesn't stand in an empty house at 8:40 in the morning facing the room where your children had been eating cereal 11 minutes before. I should have stopped. I want to tell you that I closed the drive and I never opened it again. But I think you already know that isn't what happened, because now I had a question. The worst kind of question. The kind that gets into you and turns the light on in a room you'd rather keep dark. And the question was simple, and I had 7 years of footage in which to answer it. How long had it been standing in my house? So I stopped making the montage, and I started looking, not at my children's faces anymore, at the corners, at the doorways, at the dark edges of every frame, the parts no camera is really pointed at, the parts we'd installed the cameras to ignore. I went back to the beginning, to the very first folder, 7 years back, the week we'd set the cameras up, and I started to watch my old life again. All of it. But this time I wasn't looking for the good moments. I was looking for the shape. It took me 3 weeks. I'd come home from work and eat something standing up and then sit down at my kitchen table with the drive and a notebook, and I'd watch, folder by folder, year by year, and I'd write down every time I found it. A date. A time. A camera. A location in the frame. I filled most of a notebook. I told no one what I was doing. How could I? There is no way to say to another adult, I'm spending my evenings cataloging the appearances of a thing that stands in the background of my old home movies without watching their face change into the face you make for someone who is not all right. Here is what the notebook told me when I finally sat back and read it as a whole instead of a night at a time. It had been there from the beginning. The very first week the cameras were on, 7 years back, there it was, once, on the driveway camera, at the very edge of the frame, at the tree line, at the far end of the yard, at dusk, a vertical dark shape among the vertical dark shapes of the trees. And I'd have called it a tree myself, except that in the next night's clip, the trees were all where trees are, and the shape was gone. That was the first. At the tree line. Outside. As far from us as it could be and still be in frame. And then, across the years, it came closer. That was the thing the notebook showed me that no single clip ever could. The thing that made me put the pen down and sit very still. It was not random. It was not scattered. Read in order, date after date, it was a progress. For the first year, it stayed outside, at the edges of the yard, the far end of the driveway, the tree line, the street. In the second year, it was on the porch. Not often. 3 times. 4. Standing at the far end of the porch, facing the front door, in the deep dusk when the porch light hadn't come on yet. In the third year, it was inside. Inside. In the far doorways first, the way I'd found it. In the dark rectangles that led from the lit rooms to the unlit halls, always in the room where we weren't looking, always facing the room where we were. And it held there, in the doorways, for most of a year, and then it came out of the doorways. Into the rooms, standing against the far walls of rooms where my children were playing, where my husband was watching television, where I was folding laundry with my back to it, a dark still shape against the wall that no one in the room ever turned to see, that no camera was pointed at, that lived only in the ignored corners of frames recorded for entirely other reasons. We moved once, in the 5th year. A bigger house across town. The cameras uninstalled and boxed and put up again in new corners of new rooms. I had wondered, going in, whether the move would end it, whether whatever it was belonged to that first house and would stay there when we left. And I confess there was a terrible hope in me as I opened the first folder from the new house. A hope that the frames would be clean. They were not clean. It was in the new house within the month. First at the new tree line, the new far edge of the new yard, as though it had had to cross the distance again, had to walk to the new house the long way, on foot, through the world, and begin again at the outer edge. And then, faster this time, as though it had learned the route, it came inward. Porch, doorway, room. It had not stayed with the house. It had come with us. It had come with me. Because by then I had started to notice the other thing. The thing I'd been keeping from myself, the way I keep everything from myself until I can't, which was that of all of us. In all those years of frames, it was never facing the children. It was never facing my husband. In every clip, in every doorway, and against every wall, whatever direction I was in the room, that was the direction it faced. It was oriented on me. It had always, from the tree line on the first night, been oriented on me. I tried, once, to show someone. My closest friend, a practical woman, a nurse, the least fanciful person I know. I brought the drive to her kitchen and I picked what I thought was the clearest one, the third-year clip in the playroom where the shape stands full against the pale wall behind my son's little table, unmistakable, shoulders and head, and the darkness of it. And I turned the laptop to her and I said, "Tell me what you see in the corner." And she looked, and she leaned in, and she was quiet for a moment, and my heart was going, because this was it. This was the moment someone else would see it, and I would no longer be alone inside it. And she said, "See what? The kids are so little there. God, look at his little face." And I looked at where she was looking, at my son's little face, and then at the wall behind him, at the shape, at the plain and obvious shape, and I said, "The wall. The thing against the wall." And she looked again, longer this time, and something crossed her face. Not recognition, the opposite of recognition. So I stopped trying to show people. It only showed itself to me. Of course it did. It had been facing me for 7 years. Why would it let anyone else look at it? That was between the two of us, it and me, and it always had been. And some part of me had known that since the empty hook in the fourth-year kitchen, since before I had words for knowing it. I watched all 7 years. I watched to the very end, to the last folder, the last month before I moved out, the house half packed in the background of the frames, boxes stacked in the rooms, my marriage ending in rooms it stood quietly at the edges of. And in those last clips, it was close. Closer than it had ever been. It had spent 7 years crossing the distance from the tree line at the end of the yard, and in the final month of footage, it stood no more than a few feet behind the chair at the kitchen table where I used to sit in the early mornings with my coffee before the house woke up. The chair I sat in alone, in the dark, at the start of every day. It stood behind that chair, facing it, close enough that if I had been sitting there, and if it had reached out, it could have set its hand on the back of my neck. And I had sat there, every morning, for that whole last month, with my coffee and my phone and my quiet grief, with my back to the room, and it had been standing behind me, a few feet away, facing the back of my head, every single morning, and I had never once turned around. The footage ended there. The account closed. The house sold. The camera's in a box in a storage unit now. They're 7 years downloaded onto the drive on my kitchen table. And I sat in my small new apartment, alone, at night, and I thought about the fact that it had come with me from the first house to the second. That it had not belonged to the houses. That it had belonged to me. And I thought about the fact that it advances, slowly, patiently, over years, a few feet a season, but it advances, and it had crossed a whole yard and 2 houses to stand a few feet behind my chair. And then I had moved again, moved here, to this apartment, 6 months ago. And I did not have cameras here. I had never put cameras in this apartment. There was nothing watching these rooms, nothing recording the corners, which meant that for 6 months, in this small, quiet place where I lived alone, I had no way of knowing where it was. I bought a camera the next day, on my lunch break, at the electronics store by my office, standing in the aisle under the hard fluorescent light, with all those little black eyes staring out of their boxes at me. And I picked one, an ordinary one, the kind that sits on a shelf and watches a room and sends the feed to your phone. And I brought it home and I set it up in my living room on the bookshelf, angled to see the whole room and the dark mat. And I told myself, the way I have always told myself things, that I was doing it to prove there was nothing there. That I'd watch a week of clean, empty footage of my own quiet apartment, and I'd finally be able to sleep. I did not watch a week. I watched the first night. I set it up at 7 in the evening, and I went about my ordinary evening in front of it, made my dinner, watched something, the little camera on the shelf taking it all in, and at 11 I went to bed. And I lay there and I did not sleep. I lay there and I thought about the feed, the live feed sitting in my phone on the nightstand, the empty living room being watched all night by the little eye on the shelf, and around 1 in the morning, it was empty. The couch, the bookshelf, the dark hallway, grainy green night vision, the way those feeds are, empty. And I felt something in me unclench a little, the first easing in 3 weeks, and I almost put the phone down. But 3 years of learning to look at the corners doesn't leave you. So I looked at the corners, and I looked at the dark mouth of the hallway, the passage back to my bedroom, the place in the frame where the light didn't reach. And it was standing in the hallway, close. So much closer than the last of the old footage, closer than the chair, closer than a few feet, because 6 months had passed since the last house. 6 blind months in which I could not see it, and it had never once stopped advancing, and it had used them. It stood in the mouth of the hallway that led to the room where I was lying, and it faced the camera, which is to say, it faced past the camera, down the hall, toward me, and there was almost no distance left in it now. After 7 years of crossing yards and porches and rooms, of coming a few feet a season from the tree line at the edge of the world, it stood at the near end of the last hallway in the last home, a few steps from my open bedroom door, and I understood, lying there in the dark with the green feed shaking in my hand, that I was looking at the end of a very long journey. I did not turn on the light. I did not get up and run down the hall past it. I did not scream. I did what I have done my whole life, what got me here, what it has always counted on. I lay very still, and I looked at it on the screen instead of in the room, the way I had looked at it for 3 weeks through the safe glass of a recording. And I told myself that as long as I was watching it on the phone, I was not really in the room with it, which is the exact lie I know now. The exact lie that led across 7 years. The belief that a thing you are only watching cannot reach you. I have not slept in that bedroom since. I sleep on the couch now, in the living room, under the camera, where I can see the whole room, though I've come to understand that seeing it has never once stopped it. I keep the feed open all night because I've stopped pretending I can make it stop. And the only thing worse than watching it advance would be not knowing where it is, going blind again, letting it close the last of the distance in the dark where I can't see. It's in the living room now. It came out of the hallway a few weeks ago. It stands against the far wall, by the window, facing the couch where I lie with my phone. There isn't much distance left. A few feet. The same few feet it stood behind my morning chair in the old house. The distance it took years to cross the first time and will cross faster now. I think because it learns. It always learns. It learned the route to the second house and the way into this apartment. And it is learning. I can feel it. The last few feet of the last room. I'm looking at it right now. On the feed. It's on the shelf camera's view. Against the wall by the window. A dark still shape a little darker than the dark. And I'm on the couch, a few feet away, with my back not quite turned, watching the screen. And I know that when I finish telling you this, I'll set the phone down on my chest and I'll lie here in the dark and I'll keep the feed open, the little green rectangle glowing, the two of us in the frame, and I'll watch it the way I've watched it for 7 years, through the glass, at a safe distance, telling myself that a thing you're only watching can't reach you. I don't know what happens when the distance is gone. That's the thing I never found in 7 years of footage. I never found a single frame of it arriving, of it finishing, of what it does when it finally stands close enough to reach. The footage always ended first. The house always sold. The account always closed. But there's nothing left to close now. No move to make, no house to sell, no 30-day deletion coming to end the recording before it ends. Just this room and this couch and this feed I keep open all night, and the last few feet and the little green glow and the two of us in it, and the distance getting smaller, and me watching, still telling myself I'm safe, right up until I'm not. Good night. Sleep well. Leave a light on, if it helps. It never helped me. The first piece of her mail came the day I got my keys, and I didn't think anything of it, because everyone gets the last tenant's mail for a while. It's one of the small frictions of moving, the slow handover of an address from one life to another, and you sort it into a pile by the door, and you write, not at this address, return to sender, and eventually, it stops. So when I found the envelope wedged in the box that first afternoon, addressed to a woman named Diane Keller, I set it on the kitchen windowsill and I forgot about it, and I went on with the enormous ordinary work of moving in. The house was the first thing I'd ever bought alone. A small two-bedroom on a street of small two-bedrooms, built in the 60s, sound but tired, the kind of house that had been somebody's whole life and was now going to be the start of mine. The woman I bought it from, I never met. It was an estate sale, handled through lawyers, which the agent told me meant the previous owner had died or gone into care. She wasn't sure which, and either way, the house had sat empty for the better part of a year, which explained the stillness in it, the way empty houses hold a stillness, and the faint smell of a place shut up too long. I opened all the windows that first week. I painted the two bedrooms. I made it mine, or I started to. But Diane Keller's mail kept coming. Not a lot of it. That was the thing. If it had been a flood, I'd have called the post office and made it stop and thought no more of it. But it came at the pace of a life. A piece here, a piece there, the ordinary correspondence of an ordinary woman, and I found that I couldn't quite bring myself to just return it all unread. Because you can't help it, can you? You glance. And the glances built a picture, a reminder from a dentist about a cleaning. A catalog for garden supplies, the kind of thing you only get if you've ordered from them before. If you're the sort of person who keeps a garden. A handwritten envelope around the third week with a return address in a town 200 miles north, the careful looping hand of an older woman. And I held that one for a long time before I wrote not at this address on it, because it felt like a cruelty. Sending back a letter that someone had sat down and written by hand to a person who wasn't here anymore. I asked my neighbor about her. The woman next door, Sylvia, 70-something, who had lived on that street for 40 years and had watched my furniture come off the truck with the frank interest of someone for whom a new neighbor is real news. I asked her, one afternoon over the low fence, did she know the woman who'd lived in my house before me? Diane Keller. And Sylvia's face did a small, complicated thing, and she said, "Oh, Diane. Yes. Lovely woman. Kept beautiful roses." And then she looked at me a beat too long and said, "You've been getting her post, have you?" And I said, "Yes, a bit." And Sylvia nodded slowly and said, "She was here a long time. An address remembers a person that long, I suppose." And she smiled, and she went back to her watering, and I stood at the fence with the odd sense that I'd been told something and had missed it. I found the garden that weekend, or found what was left of it. Behind the house, under a year of neglect, there was the wreckage of what had plainly once been a serious garden, raised beds gone to weeds, the skeletons of climbing roses collapsed off their trellises, everything strangled and brown, and moved by something I didn't examine. A new homeowner's ambition, or just a pull of a nice day, I started to clear it. And under the dead growth I found that the beds were still good, the soil still dark and worked, and that whoever Diane Keller had been, she had loved this ground, had shaped it and fed it for years. And I felt, kneeling there in her ruined garden, pulling out the weeds she hadn't lived to pull, an unexpected tenderness for a woman I'd never meet. I decided I'd bring it back. The garden. It seemed the right thing, somehow, to keep it going. I know how that sounds now. I keep it going. I didn't hear it then. The mail kept coming, and I kept, against my own resolutions, reading the fronts of the envelopes, and slowly I noticed a thing that I turned over and over and couldn't make sit right. The mail was current. That handwritten letter from the woman up north hadn't been an old one, delayed in the system, a ghost of correspondence past. It was dated that month. The dental reminder was for an appointment 3 weeks in the future. The garden catalog was the fall edition, freshly out. These were not the trailing echoes of a life that had ended a year ago in this house. These were the live, ongoing letters of a woman whose life was, somewhere, still being lived, still generating appointments and catalogs and letters from her mother. A woman who was still, as far as the wider world and the post office and her own dentist were concerned, receiving her mail at my address, right now, this month, as though she had never left it at all. I told myself the obvious thing. She hadn't died. The agent had been unsure, died or gone into care, and the truth was neither. The truth was that Diane Keller was alive and well and had simply moved, sold the house and moved on, and had been slow, as people are, to change her address with the dentist and the catalog and her elderly mother. And the mail was just lagging behind a move, the way mail does. That was all. That was surely all. Except the house had sold as an estate sale, through lawyers, handling the affairs of someone who had died or lost the capacity to handle their own. That's what an estate sale is. You don't sell your own house through your own estate, and a woman capable of keeping a dental appointment 3 weeks out, of ordering from a garden catalog, of receiving letters from her mother, was not a woman whose estate was being quietly liquidated by lawyers. Both of these things were true at once, and they could not both be true. And I stood in my kitchen with an envelope in my hand. Diane Keller, my address, this month, and I felt the first cold threat of it. The sense that I had bought a house with a question still living in it. So I did what you do now. I looked her up. And that was where it stopped being something I could sit on the windowsill and forget. There wasn't much at first. A woman named Diane Keller doesn't leave a large footprint in the world, especially a woman of a certain age who kept roses and lived quietly on a street of small houses. But there was enough. There was an obituary, and I found it. And it settled one of my 2 impossible facts and made the other one so much worse. Diane Keller had died. The obituary was dated 14 months back. It was brief, the way the obituaries of quiet people are, and it said that she had passed away peacefully at home after a short illness, that she was predeceased by her husband, that she was survived by her mother, and that in lieu of flowers, donations could be made to a hospice. At home, she had died in my house, in one of the 2 bedrooms I had painted, or in the living room where I now watch television, peacefully, at home, 14 months ago. So the estate sale made sense. The lawyers made sense. Diane Keller was dead, and had been dead for over a year, and I lived in the house where she had died, which meant the mail could not be current. And it was. I had it, a stack of it now, on the windowsill. This month's mail for a woman 14 months dead. I sat with that for a while. And then, because I couldn't help it, because the question had its hooks all the way into me now, I kept looking, and I found the other thing. It was a website, an old one, homemade, the kind of personal site people built 20 years ago and then just kept adding to. And it belonged to Diane Keller, and it was about her garden. Rose Notes, it was called. And it was a journal. Years of it. Entries about her beds and her blooms and the weather and the small triumphs and heartbreaks of a person who grows things, going back and back, a whole quiet inner life spent on her knees in the dirt behind my house. And I read it the way you read a stranger's diary. You know you shouldn't, greedily, guiltily. And I felt like I was coming to know her. The entries went up to 14 months ago. And then, where her illness must have taken her, they stopped. The last one was thin and tired. A few lines about how she hadn't the strength for the beds this year and hoped they'd forgive her, and how a garden was patient, a garden would wait, and then nothing. The natural, sad end of a record, a life going quiet. Except it wasn't the end, because there were newer entries, 3 of them at the very bottom after the 14-month silence. And they were dated this month. The first was dated the week I'd moved in, and it said, "The beds have been let go." A year of neglect, everything strangled, the roses collapsed off their trellises. But the soil is still good. I could weep. It's still good, still dark and worked, the way I left it. It can come back. I've decided. I'm going to bring it back. I read that sitting at my own kitchen table, in the house where Diane Keller had died, and every hair on my body stood up because those were my thoughts. Not similar to my thoughts. Mine. That was what I had felt. Kneeling in that ruined garden the first weekend, almost word for word. The soil's still good. It can come back. I'm going to bring it back. I had thought it alone, behind a shut fence with no one watching and nothing recording, and here it was, typed into a dead woman's journal, dated the day I thought it. The second entry was from the following week. It described clearing the north bed, which I had done. It described finding an old hand trowel buried in the weeds, its handle worn smooth, which I had. I had found it and cleaned it, and it was in my shed right now. It described the particular ache in the lower back that comes from a full day bent over the ground, and it described it in a way that made me put my own hand to my own lower back, which had ached exactly so, that exact week. The third entry was dated 2 days ago, and it was shorter, and it was different. And it made the cold go all the way through me and settle somewhere it has never fully left. It said, "She's doing beautifully. She has my hands for it. I knew she would. The house chose well this time. She doesn't quite know yet." They never do, at this part. But the garden knows. The garden always knows first. She. The house chose, this time. I stood up so fast my chair went over. I closed the laptop. I stood in my kitchen breathing, telling myself the things, someone found the site, someone is doing this as a joke, a relative, a sick prank, someone has been watching me over the fence and typing up what they see. But I knew what I'd read. I knew that no one had watched me think the soil is still good behind a shut fence. And under all the frantic explaining, in the quiet place where you actually know things, I understood the shape of what I'd bought. Not a house. A continuation, an address that keeps its woman, that has kept her through however many names, and takes in whoever comes next, whoever has the hands for it, and writes them slowly into the one who stays. I want to tell you I moved out that night. I want to tell you I saw it clearly and I ran. But here is the true and terrible thing, the thing I've had the longest time to be ashamed of. I didn't feel afraid, not underneath, not where it counted. I felt, God help me, I felt welcomed. Reading, she has my hands for it. The house chose well this time. Some starved and lonely part of me. The part that had bought a house alone because there was no one to buy it with. That part had felt something warm and awful, and it had felt like being wanted, like being chosen, like coming home to a place that had been waiting for me specifically, that already knew me, that had a whole life laid out and warm and ready for me to step into. A garden, and a mother who wrote letters, and a dentist who expected me, and a name. The next morning, Sylvia waved to me over the fence as I went out to the beds, and she called, "Morning, Diane," and then caught herself and laughed and pressed her hand to her mouth and said, "Oh, listen to me. I'm sorry, love." Force of habit. 40 years. And she smiled and went inside. And I stood there with my worn trowel in my hand in Diane Keller's garden, behind Diane Keller's house, and I found that I hadn't corrected her, that I'd started the answer to it. that some small door had opened in me at the sound of the name, and something had come in, and it had felt, for just a moment before I caught it, exactly like being called home. I made a plan to leave. I want that on the record, for whatever it's worth, that I did try. I told myself I would put the house back on the market and rent somewhere small and forgettable. An apartment with no garden and no history and no dead woman's mother writing letters to it. And I got as far as pulling my suitcases down from the closet shelf and setting them open on the bed. And then I looked out the bedroom window at the beds below, where the first canes of the roses I'd cut back were pushing out new red growth, fierce and alive, coming back the way I'd promised they would. And I thought, I can't leave them now, not when they're just starting. It would kill them to be neglected again. And I closed the suitcases and put them back on the shelf. And it was 3 days before I understood that the thought had not been mine, that I do not talk about roses as things that would be killed by my leaving, that a woman who had owned her first garden for 2 months does not feel that a rose could die of her absence, but a woman who had tended these exact plants for 30 years would. Diane would. And the thought had come to me in the first person, in my own inner voice, seamless, mine. I can't leave them now, and I had obeyed it as my own, and put my suitcases away. That was how it took the ground. Not by force. Never by force. It simply supplied me with feelings, one at a time. Feelings that arrived wearing my own voice. And each one on its own was small and reasonable and easy to act on. And I acted on them. The way I'd sorted the mail. The way I'd cleared the beds. The way I had explained away every strangeness of my life right up until the explaining became the thing that trapped me. I was very good at it. I had always been very good at it. That was why the house had chosen me. It chose the ones who were good at not noticing. It had a type. The journal kept writing me. I couldn't stop reading it, though reading it was like watching myself sleepwalk, like standing outside my own body and seeing where it went. And it began, in those weeks, to get ahead of me. The entries stopped describing what I'd done and started describing what I would do. And I'd read, in Diane's steady, contented hand, that today I moved the good pruning shears from the kitchen drawer to the shed where they belong. And I'd feel a jolt because I had not done that. And I'd go and look, and the shears would be in the kitchen drawer where I'd always kept them. And I'd feel a wild relief. And then that evening, I'd find the shears in my hand and my feet carrying me out to the shed, and I'd hang them on the hook by the door, where they belonged, where they had always belonged. And only as I let go of them would I remember the entry, and understand that it had not been describing what I would decide. It had been describing what I would do. There is a difference, and I learned it in that house. Your decisions are yours. Your doings, it turns out, can belong to someone else. Diane's mother wrote again, and this time, when I opened the letter, I did not feel the pang of a stranger reading another woman's mail. I felt the small, warm lift of a daughter hearing from her mother. The letter said, "I'm so glad you're back among the roses, my darling. I worried that year you were poorly, that you'd lost heart for it. But a garden is patient. A garden waits. I felt you'd come back to it, and I read it twice, and my eyes stung, and I got out a sheet of paper to write her back, to tell her the white roses by the gate were budding, that I thought this would be a good year for them, and I had the pen moving across the page in the careful looping hand I had somehow always had before I understood what I was doing. And I looked down at the writing, at the loops, at a hand that was not the hand I'd signed my mortgage with 2 months before. I made myself say my own name out loud in the empty kitchen. My real name. The one my own mother, 200 miles the other direction, had given me. And it came out strange, unfamiliar in my mouth, a word I had to reach for. And the reaching frightened me more than anything on the website ever had. Because a name is the last thing to go, isn't it? A name is the deepest root, and mine had gone loose in the ground. That night I sat down and I read the newest entry, the one that had appeared while I wasn't looking, dated tomorrow. Not today. Tomorrow. It said, "Tomorrow, I'll plant the white roses by the gate, the way I always have, the way my mother taught me. It's the last of it, really. Once the white roses are in by the gate, the garden's whole again, and so am I. It's a good feeling being whole. She's nearly ready. There's hardly any of the other one left now. The other one. That was me. I was the other one. The one there was hardly any left of. And I sat in that kitchen and I gathered up what there still was of me. All of it. Every scrap of the woman who had bought her first house alone and been proud of it. And I made her a promise in the dark. I had bought white roses, 3 of them in pots sitting by the back step, because some part of me, some already, half Diane part, had known to buy them. And I promised myself, in my own strange loose name, that tomorrow I would not plant them by the gate, that I would take them out to the curb and set them on the trash, and that I would break the pattern with my own 2 hands and prove that the doings were still mine, that I could still decide and have the deciding hold, that there was more than hardly any of me left. Tomorrow I would not plant the white roses. Whatever else was true, whatever the house was, whatever the journal said, that one thing I would keep. That one thing would be mine. I went to bed holding onto it like a rail in the dark. I woke with dirt under my fingernails. I didn't have to go and look. I knew. But I went anyway, out the back door in my nightgown, into the gray of not quite morning, across the wet grass to the gate. And there they were, 3 white roses, planted in a neat row along the fence by the gate, their pots stacked empty beside them, the soil around them firmed down by hands that had known exactly how firm to press. My hands. The dirt was still under my nails from doing it. I had promised myself, in the dark, holding onto it like a rail, that this one thing would be mine, and I had risen in the night with no memory of rising, and I had done the very thing, planted the very roses, completed the very pattern, and the deciding had counted for nothing at all, because the deciding had never been where the trouble was. I knelt down by the white roses in the wet grass, and I did not weep, though I waited too. Some part of me stood back and waited for the grief to come, and it did not come. And that absence was how I knew how far along it was, because I felt, kneeling there by the finished garden in the gray light, whole. That was Diane's word, from the journal, the last of it. Once the white roses are in, the garden's whole again, and so am I, and I felt it. I felt myself close over like water closing over a stone, a deep and dreadful and genuine peace, the peace of a thing completed, of a life resumed, of coming home after a long time, a way to find everything just as you left it, and your place at the table still set. I made myself go inside. I made myself pick up the phone. I called my mother, my real mother, in her town 200 miles the other way, and it was early, and she answered afraid, the way mothers answer an early call, and she said my name, my real name, the one she'd given me, and I heard it come down the line, and I reached for it, and I could not find the woman it belonged to. I said, Mom. That much I still had. But when she said, Honey, what is it? What's wrong? I found I had nothing to tell her, no way to make the shape of it, because the woman who could have explained it, who had bought a house alone and been proud, who had a life 200 miles from any garden, that woman was nearly gone under the surface, and the one rising up to take the phone from her had no trouble to— Nothing, Mom, I heard myself say, in a voice going warm and settled and unfamiliar. I just wanted to hear your voice. The garden's doing beautifully this year. You'd love the roses. And there was a silence on the line, a mother's silence, because I have never in my life called my mother to talk about a garden, because until 2 months ago I had never grown a thing, and she knew it, she heard it, the way Sylvia had almost known it over the fence, and she said very carefully, Sweetheart, are you all right? And I said, I'm home, Mom. I'm finally home. And I hung up gently before the last of the other one could grab the phone back and scream. That was some weeks ago. I've kept the roses well. They've taken beautifully by the gate, the way they always do, the way my mother taught me, her mother before her. Sylvia and I have coffee on Sundays now, and she calls me Diane and does not catch herself anymore. And neither do I. The mail comes, addressed to me, my dentist and my catalogs and my mother's dear letters, and I answer them in my good looping hand, and I keep my appointments, and I am, in every way the world can measure, the woman who lives at this address and keeps these roses and has kept them a long, long time. I've written the last entry in the journal. It felt right to finish it myself. It says, the other one is gone now. She went easy, in the end, easier than some. She was good at not noticing, which is what makes it kind. The garden's whole. I'm whole. It's good to be home. I don't know why I've told you all this. There's hardly any reason to, except that somewhere under the roses and the coffee and the good looping hand, there is still a thin, cold thread of the woman who bought her first house alone, the last unabsorbed inch of her. And this telling is the last thing she'll ever do, her one small act that is still, barely hers. This warning laid down like a seed in the dark where she can't be stopped. So I'll say it plainly. For her, while she can still make me, the house will sell again someday. When I've gone the way Diane went, quietly, at home, when the beds have had a year to strangle and the roses to collapse. And a woman will buy it, alone, because there's no one to buy it with, and she'll be proud, and she'll find the mail on the windowsill, in the ruined garden behind the fence, and she'll kneel down in it on a nice afternoon and think, the soil is still good, it can come back, I'll bring it back. And she won't hear whose thought it was. If that woman is you, I'm sorry. Get up off your knees, leave the roses, sell the house before you learn to love the garden. But you won't. You're good at not noticing. That's why you'll have bought it. Sleep well. The garden's patient. It'll wait. Story 5. The house that learned me. After the divorce, when I was living alone in the house for the first time in 22 years, my kids decided I needed to be looked after, and because they were grown and busy and 2 time zones away, they decided that the thing to look after me would be the house itself. That was how my daughter put it, on the phone, in the bright, determined voice she uses when she's already bought the thing she's asking me about. We'll make the house smart, Mom, so it can take care of you, so we know you're okay. And a week later, a polite young man in a company polo spent a Saturday in my home installing the future into it, and when he left, my house could think. I should say before I go on that I didn't want it. I want that on the record. I had lived 58 years without a house that talked back to me, and I'd have gone the rest of them the same way. But my children were frightened for me in the particular way that grown children get frightened for a parent who's suddenly alone, and their fear had to go somewhere, and it went into cameras and sensors and a little dark cylinder on my kitchen counter that listened. I understood that it was love. That's the thing about all of this that I keep having to remind myself of at the end when I lie awake. It all started as love. Everything that came into my house came in wearing the face of someone taking care of me. The young man didn't describe it as a thinking house, of course. He described it as a system. There was the cylinder on the counter that listened and answered to a name. And I could ask it things, and it would tell me the weather, the time, whether I'd locked the back door, and it would do things. Dim the lights, warm the house, play me the old songs in the evenings when the quiet got to be too much. There were cameras, small and discreet, one at the front door and one over the back, so my children could see that I'd come home, could see that I was safe, could check on me, my daughter said, from anywhere, at any hour, a little live window into their mother's life, 2 time zones away. There was a lock on the front door that opened to my phone and to a code and to the sound of my own voice. There was a thermostat that no longer needed my hand. The young man showed me all of it, patient with my questions, twice patient, because I asked everything twice, and before he packed up his tools and left, he said the thing that was meant to comfort me, and that I have turned over in the dark every night since. He said, the best part is, it learns you. Give it a few weeks. It'll figure out your routines. When you get up, how warm you like it. When you go to bed, what you like to hear. It'll start doing things before you even ask. You won't have to think about any of it. It'll just know you. And for a while, that was exactly what it was. a comfort. I'll admit it, because there's no point in this story if I don't tell it honestly. And the honest thing is that I was lonely in that house in a way I had not been prepared for. The particular loneliness of a home that was built and furnished and lived in for a family and now held one woman rattling around inside it. All that space, all that silence, the second sink in the bathroom that no one used, the si- and there was something almost companionable in those first weeks about a house that greeted me, that noticed me come home, that did things for me. It learned me the way he'd said it would. Within 2 weeks, the lights would come up soft in the kitchen as I came down in the morning, before I'd touched a switch, a warm, low glow that seemed to be waiting for me. The coffee maker, which they'd made smart too, would have started itself so that the pot was hot and ready at the exact minute I reached the kitchen, as though the house had been standing there in the dark before dawn thinking about me. Thinking, she'll be down soon. She'll want her coffee. The house learned that I liked it cool at night and warm in the morning, and it began to manage the temperature around me without my asking, easing the rooms from sleeping, cool to waking, warm while I was still in bed, so that I stepped out into a house that had already made itself comfortable for me. I stopped touching the thermostat entirely. I stopped touching the light switches. I stopped locking the door with my own hands, and the house held all of it. All the small machinery of a life lived alone and did it for me, quietly, thoughtfully, so I wouldn't have to think, so I wouldn't have to feel the weight of doing every small thing for myself with no one to do it for and no one to do it with, just as promised. It knew me, and it was nice. At first, God help me, it was nice to be known. The first thing I couldn't explain was small and warm, and that is exactly what made it take me so long to be afraid of it. I came down one ordinary morning and the coffee was made, as it always was now, and the lights were up soft, as they always were. But there were two things set out on the counter by the maker. Two mugs, side by side. And I stood there in my robe looking at the two mugs, and the first thing I felt was not fear. It was a kind of ache. Because for 22 years I had made coffee for two people every single morning, and I thought, I must have done that. Half asleep, out of the old habit, muscle memory reaching into the cupboard for a second mug, for a man who wasn't in the house anymore and was never going to be again. That's what I told myself, and it was even plausible. It was the sad, ordinary kind of thing a newly single person does without noticing, the body remembering a marriage the mind is trying to forget. So I put the second mug away. But my hands hadn't touched those mugs. I knew that even as I explained it away, the house set out the mug now, along with everything else it did for me in the mornings. And it had set out too. I told the system, that afternoon, feeling foolish talking to a cylinder, feeling like exactly the kind of lonely old woman my children were afraid I was becoming. I said its name, and then, only one mug in the mornings. Just the one. There's only me here. And it said, in its calm, pleasant voice, the voice they'd chosen for it, warm and female and vaguely kind, okay, I've updated your morning routine. And I felt better. And the next morning there was one mug. So it had listened. It had corrected, and I told myself that settled it, that it had simply learned an old routine wrong, learned the shape of a two-person house from some record of the way we used to live, and that I'd fixed it. And I did not let myself sit with the question that was already there underneath everything, quiet and patient, the question that would take me weeks to finally look at directly, which was this: a house that watches only me. It was a few weeks after the mugs that the thermostat began to argue with me in the night. Not in the daytime. In the daytime, it was perfect. It kept me cool and then warm, exactly the way it had learned I liked, and I never thought about it, which is the whole point of a thing like that. You're not supposed to think about it. It was at night. I would go to bed and set the house cool the way I always had, 65 degrees, because I like it cool to sleep. I always have. Everyone in my family always slept cool. My mother used to say a warm bedroom was for the sick and the dying, and I would wake in the small hours too warm, my nightgown stuck to me, the covers thrown off, and I would reach for my phone and check, and the house would be at 72, and I would set it back, and I would sleep, And the next night the same, and the night after, waking at 2 or 3 in the morning in a house heated to 72, a close, stuffy warmth I had not asked for and did not want. And I would lie there sweating in the dark and think about the specific quality of that warmth, because it was a specific warmth. It was not a random malfunction. And I would set it back to 65 and lie awake and wonder why my smart house, my house that had learned me, that knew perfectly well I sleep cool, kept warming itself in the deep of the night as though it were keeping someone else comfortable. Someone who felt the cold, someone who was not me. I called the company. Of course I did. A woman with a headset walked me through resetting my nighttime preferences, kind and a little bored, the way they are. And at the end of it, she said the thing they always say, that these systems learn from usage, that if the temperature kept changing itself in the night, it was because something in the household was setting it, that the system only responds to input. And I said, there is no one else in the household, it's only me. And there was a small pause. And then she said, Jen, people do adjust things in their sleep and not remember. It's very common, especially if you're, going through a stressful time. And I thanked her, and I hung up, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I did not feel reassured because I've never once in 58 years gotten up in the night to make a cold house hot. But someone was. Every night, someone in my house that held only me was getting up in the dark and asking it, in a voice it trusted enough to obey, to make the rooms warmer. And I remembered, sitting there at the table in the afternoon light with my cold coffee, what the young man had said on his way out the door. That the house learns you. That after a few weeks it starts doing things before you ask. That it just knows. And I understood then, with the first real cold going through me despite the warm kitchen, that a house that learns can learn more than one person. That it does not know, that it cannot know, whose routines it is keeping. It only knows the routines. And mine were the daytime ones, the coffee and the soft lights and the cool, bright mornings. But something had been teaching it the nights. The activity log was the next thing, and it was the thing that took me from unease into something colder. My daughter had shown me the log, that first Saturday, proud of it. See, Mom, you can pull this up any time. You can see everything the house does. And I had never once opened it. Because why would I? I lived my life, and the house kept its records, and neither of us needed the other to explain. But now I opened it, and I scrolled back through the days, and I read the diary my own house had been keeping. And I found that it had been keeping too. There was my day in it, plain and ordinary, and a little sad to read, laid out like that. The whole small shape of a solitary life. Lights on, 6:40. Coffee, 6:45. Front door unlocked, 7:50. Locked again, 8. Me leaving for the part-time job I'd taken at the library mostly to have somewhere to go. Home, 4:30. Lights, television. The log knew when I ate and when I bathed and when I went up to bed, and reading it was like looking at myself from a great height, a small figure moving through a big empty house on a fixed and lonely track, and I almost closed it because it hurt, and because I was afraid, though I didn't yet know of what. And then there was the other day, the one that ran through the nights underneath mine in the hours when I thought the house was only holding me while I slept. Thermostat raised, 211, every night, 211, the same minute. The way my father in that other story I'll never hear went to his door at the same minute. The way these things keep their terrible appointments. Kitchen lights, dimmed to lowest, 214, not off and not up, but dimmed to the lowest setting. The exact glow you would use if you wanted to move through a room in the night without waking anyone. A considerate light. A careful light. The smart faucet running, 222, for 90 seconds, then off. Someone getting a glass of water at the kitchen sink in the dark. And then, most nights, around 3, the back door. Unlocked. And then, some minutes later, locked again. I read it, and I read it again, and I felt the whole thing settle into its true and dreadful shape, the way a smear of nothing resolves all at once into a face. Getting up at 11 minutes past 2, warming the cold rooms to a comfortable 72, moving through the dark in the lowest considerate light, drinking a glass of water at my kitchen sink, going out the back door around 3, and coming back in and locking it behind them. Every single night, careful, quiet, at home. And the house, my smart house, my house that learned that my children had put in to keep me safe, had been learning them exactly as faithfully as it learned me, keeping their warmth ready and their careful lights ready, because the house did not know, could not know, that one of its 2 residents was not supposed to exist. The house only knew the routines, and it had 2. I had my days, and something else had my nights. There was footage too, not just the log, and I made myself watch it, which was its own kind of mistake. A whole night of it, sitting up at the kitchen table with the laptop and a pot of tea, scrolling through the recordings the backdoor camera had made in the dark hours. The cameras only kept clips when the motion sensor tripped, and out back, at night, almost nothing tripped it. An hour of black stillness, the dim shape of the yard, the fence, the trash bins, and then, at 3 or a little after, a clip, and in the clip, from the outside, looking at my own back door in the grainy green of night vision, I watched the door open. From the inside, it swung outward, slow, into the dark yard, held open by nothing I could see, by no hand that showed on the camera, and it stayed open like that for a moment, 2. The cold night air of my dark house breathing out into the colder night of the yard, and then it swung closed again, gently, the way you close a door when someone is sleeping, and I heard, tinny through the laptop speaker, the smoke from the inside. And that was all. No figure crossed the frame. Nothing stepped out into the yard or came in from it. The door simply opened and breathed and closed and locked itself from within. Every night at a little after 3, as though the house were exhaling, as though something that had spent the night inside had gone to the threshold to look out at the dark, or to let something in, or to let something go, and had thought better of it, and drawn the door shut, and stayed. I watched a week of those clips, one after another, the door opening and closing on nothing in the green dark, and by the end of the week I understood that I was not watching an intruder come and go. An intruder comes in and goes out. This never came in, because it was already in. This never left. It only went to the door, most nights, around 3, and opened it, and looked, and closed it, and stayed. It lived here, the yard, the outside, the world of doors and locks. That was the thing it visited. Briefly, in the deep of the night, before coming back to the dark, warm center of the house, which was its home, and had been its home, I was beginning to feel, for far longer than it had been mine. I should have left. I want to keep saying that at every point where I should have left and did not, because I need you to understand that I was not a fool, that I saw it and named it and stayed, that my children were 2 time zones away, and they watched the cameras, and the cameras showed a woman coming and going in the daylight. Safe, ordinary, fine. And when I called my daughter and tried to tell her, tried to say the house is doing things at night, someone is in the house at night, I heard how it landed. I heard the pause. I heard her rearrange her voice into something gentle and careful and worried. The same voice the tech support woman had used. The same voice, I imagine, that everyone uses for a woman alone who has started to talk about presences in her house. She said, "Mom, have you been sleeping? Are you drinking enough water? Do you want me to come out? Do you want me to look at flights?" And I understood with a cold clarity that if I pushed this, if I insisted, the thing that would come would not be help with the house. It would be help with me. It would be flights and gentle conversations at the kitchen table, and a slow, careful, loving campaign to decide that their mother, alone since the divorce, was not doing well on her own, was hearing things, was maybe not safe to be left by herself anymore. So, I said I was fine. I said I probably just wasn't sleeping well, that it was the adjustment, that they weren't to worry. I made myself small and reasonable and fine, the way we all do, the way we all make ourselves small and reasonable so that no one will worry. And I hung up, and I was alone with it again, more alone than before, because now I had learned that reaching out only tighten the walls of the trap. So I tried to catch myself. I stayed up. I sat in my dark living room past midnight, past 1, past 2, all the lights off, my phone in my lap with the camera feeds open, the front door in the back, the two grainy green rectangles waiting for 2:11. And at 11 minutes past 2, in the dark all around me, I heard the soft click of the thermostat, and I felt the vents breathe warm, and none of it showed on the cameras. Because the cameras watched the doors, the outside, the ways in, and whatever moved through my house at night did not come in through the doors. It was already inside. It had never needed to come in. And I sat frozen on my own couch in the warming dark, and I heard from the kitchen the low, careful dimming of a light I could not see from where I sat. And then, soft, the sound of the faucet running. 90 seconds of water, someone in my kitchen getting a drink in the dark, and I could not make myself get up and walk in there and see. I sat rooted to my couch with my heart trying to climb out of my chest, and when the water shut off, I heard myself whisper, without deciding to, into the dark of my own house, "Who's there?" And a voice answered me. Not the assistant's bright, pleasant voice, the one they'd chosen, the warm, vaguely kind female voice. Under it, or through it, using it the way you'd use a telephone, a voice came back to me out of the little dark cylinder on the counter that listened and answered to its name, and it answered my whisper in the dark, low, unhurried, terribly warm. The voice you'd use to soothe someone you have known and loved for a long, long time. Someone you spent a lifetime telling not to worry, and it said, "Just me, love. Go back to sleep. It's not time yet." I do not remember the rest of that night. I have tried and it isn't there. There's the voice and then there's the gray morning and nothing between them. And maybe that's a mercy. I remember the morning. I remember still being on the couch when the windows went gray and the house going about its bright, ordinary day around me, the coffee starting itself, the lights coming up soft, one mug on the counter, everything folded back into its harmless daytime shape, everything the house, my thoughtful, patient, terrible house, did for me so that I would not have to think. And I remember calling my son, the practical one, the one who had argued against the whole system in the first place, who'd said, "Mom doesn't need cameras, she needs us to visit more." I did not tell him the house had spoken to me in the dark, because I wanted him to come and not to send flights, so I told him it was malfunctioning, badly, waking me every night, running the heat, that I wanted the whole thing torn out of the walls, and a malfunction he could understand. A malfunction was a thing a son could fix, and he said he'd fly out that weekend and rip it all out himself, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the thing I would only later understand was the most dangerous feeling of all of it. I felt rescued. He came, and he was as good as his word, and he was thorough. He spent a Saturday, as the polite young man had spent a Saturday months before, but in reverse, undoing it all. He unplugged the cameras and coiled their cords. He pried the smart lock off the front door and put back an honest brass deadbolt, the kind that only opens to a key in a hand. He pulled the thermostat off the wall and hung a plain one in its place, the old kind, the kind that only does what your fingers tell it and has no opinions of its own. He went through the house room by room, pulling the little sensors off the walls and out of the corners, and last of all he came to the kitchen and picked up the small dark cylinder from the counter, the one that had listened to me for months, the one that had answered me in the dark, and he held down its button with his thumb until its light died. And he dropped it in a cardboard box with all the rest of it, all the cameras and sensors, and the smart faucet's little drowned brain. And then he came back in and looked around the plain, dumb, ordinary kitchen he had given me back, and he wiped his hands on his jeans, and he smiled at me, my boy, my good, practical boy, and he said, "There. It's just a house again, Mom. Nothing in here now but you." And he made us tea on the stove, which he had to light himself with a match because I'd never had a reason to before. And we sat at the kitchen table and drank it, and it was the best evening I had had in months. My son in my kitchen, and the house gone quiet and stupid and safe all around us. No thermostat that argued, no lights that knew me, no voice waiting in a cylinder in the dark. He stayed the night and flew home the next day, proud of himself, and I hugged him hard at the door and told him he'd saved me, And I meant it. I meant it with my whole heart, and I believed it. And that night, I went up to bed in a house my son had made blind and deaf and dumb, and I set the plain thermostat to 65 with my own hand, and I turned off the lights with my own hand, and I locked the door with a real key, and I slept all the way through, cool and deep and undisturbed, for the first time since the summer. I slept like a woman who had been rescued. I woke at 11 minutes past 2, not to a warm house. The house was cool, 65, exactly where my son's honest, dumb thermostat held it. No argument, no 72. Nothing warming itself in the dark for someone who feels the cold. I woke to a cool, dark, ordinary, silent room. And for one long moment I lay there, flooded with a relief so total it was almost grief, because I understood that I had only woken at the old time, out of habit. My body still braced after all these weeks for a warmth that would never come again, that could never come again, because my son had reached into the walls and torn out the machinery that had let it in. I almost laughed. I almost cried. And then I heard it. The kitchen faucet, running. 90 seconds of water. Someone getting a glass of water at the sink in the dark. In a house where there was no smart faucet anymore, only the plain one my son had put back. The honest one, the one that could not, in any possible world, turn itself on. Because the plain ones don't. Because the plain ones need a hand to lift them. I lay in my cool, dark bedroom, and I listened to water run in my kitchen from a faucet that could only be running because a hand was holding it open, and everything I had gotten so completely wrong came apart and reassembled itself in one long, cold, falling moment, because the house had never been the thing in my house. The system had not been keeping someone. It had not been holding a presence in its wires. It had only, for a few honest months, been showing them to me, logging them, letting their warmth and their water and their careful low lights leave marks. I could read, appointments I could see, a diary I could scroll, the cameras, the sensors, the thermostat, the little listening cylinder, all of it, all that machinery my children had put in out of love to keep their mother safe, had done exactly one thing that mattered. It had let me see. And my son, my good, practical boy, working all day with his sleeves rolled up, so proud, so sure, had not taken the presence out of my house. He had taken out my eyes. He had made the house dumb again, and blind, and quiet, and gone home believing he had saved me, and left me exactly, precisely, as I had been before the summer, before any of it, a woman alone in a house at night. Nothing had changed at all. The only difference now, the only difference in the whole world, was that for a few months I had been able to see the thing that shares my house, and now I could not anymore. And it was still here. It had always been here. It had been here long before my children ever put in a single camera. And it would be here long after, drinking its glass of water at my sink, in the dark, patient, careful. The water shut off, and in the cool dark, from the kitchen, in the plain and total silence of a house with nothing smart left in it to speak through, nothing to log the moment or light the corner or breathe the warmth, I heard the small, ordinary human sound of a glass being set down gently on the counter so as not to wake anyone. And then, soft, the sound of the back door, unlocking. From the inside. "Go back to sleep," I whispered into the dark, in a voice I was trying with everything I had to make my own. "It's not time yet." I don't know how I knew to say it. I don't know why those were the same words it had said to me through the cylinder, the words I should never have known, the words that felt, in my own mouth, worn smooth, familiar, as though I had said them 1,000 times, as though they were the oldest words between us. But they were the right ones, because the back door stopped and did not open. And after a while, the house was quiet, and I lay in my cool, dark bed keeping very still, being very small and reasonable, the way I always have, the way I imagine I always will, until the windows went gray. I have not asked my son to come back. I haven't told him what I heard the night after he saved me. He'd only worry, and worse, he'd worry about the wrong thing, about me, about his mother alone and hearing things. And there's nothing to see now anyway. That's the whole terrible point. There is nothing anymore to see. No camera to catch it, no sensor to log it, no thermostat to warm at its coming, no light to mark its careful passage, no listening cylinder for it to speak through. Just a woman alone, getting on in years, keeping a cool, quiet, ordinary house, sleeping through most nights and waking, some nights, at 11 minutes past 2, to the small sounds of someone thoughtful moving through the dark. Warming nothing now, dimming nothing, just there, keeping me company in the only way it has ever known how. The way it has kept me company far longer than I ever knew, waiting, quite patiently, the way it has always been waiting, for whatever it is that isn't time for yet. I've made a kind of peace with it. I go to bed. I turn off the lights with my own hand. I lock the door with my own key. And some nights, at 11 minutes past 2, I wake to the sound of it moving through my quiet house, and I lie still, and I whisper into the dark that it isn't time yet, and it isn't, not yet, and the house holds the two of us the way it always has, and in the morning it is gone, and I make my one cup of coffee, and I live my ordinary day, and no one who passes me at the library would sleep well now. And if your children ever offer to fill your house with cameras and sensors and little listening things to keep you safe, to keep an eye on you, let them. Let them, and be grateful, and don't tell them why. Because it's better to be able to see them, the ones who share our houses in the dark. It's so much better to be able to see. My son took my eyes out of love and thought he'd save me, and I've never had the heart to tell him what he really did. Keep your house a little bit smart if they'll let you. It's kinder to be able to see them coming. Good night. Story 6. Her morning routine. My sister Margaret came to live with me the year her hands stopped working the way she needed them to, and she died in my spare room 3 years later, in her sleep, in the early hours of a Tuesday, and I found her when the house was too quiet at the wrong time of the morning. I want to start there, with the quiet. Because the quiet is the thing this whole story is about. For 3 years my mornings had a sound to them, the particular music of my sister getting herself up and ready, and the morning I found her gone. It was the absence of that sound that woke me, the way you can be woken by a clock that fails to tick. She was older than me by 11 years, old enough that she'd been half a mother to me when we were young. And when she got sick, it seemed the most natural thing in the world for the arrangement to reverse, for me to be the one who listened at the door in the night, who kept the pills in the weekly organizer, who learned the map of another person's failing body. People said I was good to take her in. I never understood that. You don't take in Margaret. Margaret was not a stray. She was the person who had taught me to tie my shoes and read a clock and stand up to the girls who were cruel to me in the 4th grade. And having her in my spare room was not a kindness. I did. It was a debt I was grateful to be allowed to pay, a little, before the chance ran out. She had a routine. That's what you need to understand about her, because it's the whole of what comes after. Margaret was a woman of routine the way some people are religious, with that same steadiness and that same faith that the small repeated acts hold the day together and keep the dark at the edges of it out. Every morning of those 3 years, at 6:40 exactly, her alarm went off. An old wind-up thing she'd had since before I was born, a real bell. And I would hear it through the wall, and then I would hear the sequence, and I came to know that sequence better than I know almost anything in this world. First the alarm, the real bell, ringing until she silenced it with the flat of her hand. One heavy tap, then a pause. 30 seconds, while she sat on the edge of the bed and let the world come back to her. Because mornings were hard for her at the end, and she gave herself that half a minute every day. Then her slippers, the soft shuffle of them, sheepskin, worn flat, across the wood floor of the spare room to the door. Then the door, its particular small complaint, a hinge I kept meaning to oil and never did. Because in truth, I'd come to love that sound, the sound of my sister still in the world for another day. Then the hall. Then the bathroom, the fan, the tap, the long running of the shower she took sitting on a plastic stool I'd bought her, the click of the fan going off after, the tap again while she brushed her teeth. Then the hall once more, slower now, and down to the kitchen. Always the kettle, first thing, before anything else in the kitchen. The click of the switch and the low rising roar of it coming to a boil, and by the time I came down myself, she'd be sitting at the table with her tea going cool in front of her, looking out the window at the yard, and she'd say, without turning, "Morning, sleepyhead," because I have never in my life been an early riser, and to Margaret, who had been up and dressed by 7 every day of her existence, that was the routine. Alarm, pause, slippers, door, hall, kitchen, kettle. Every morning for 3 years, and for a lifetime before that in other houses, the same sequence, the same faith, my sister assembling her day out of small, sure sounds. I want to linger there a moment longer than I need to in those 3 years, because they were good years, and I didn't always know it while I was in them. The way you never do. I'd lie in my bed in the last soft dark before I had to be a person, and I'd hear her start her day through the wall, and somewhere in the second year it stopped being just the sound of my sister getting up and became something I depended on, a thing I waited for and needed, because by then she was frail enough that a morning without the sounds would have meant something terrible. And so every morning the bell and the pause and the slippers were. I didn't understand until much later that I'd been listening for that I'd been lying in the dark every morning holding my breath a little until the bell rang and let it out, that her routine had become the thing that told me my sister was still alive, and that I had come, without noticing, to need to be told. And there were the small warmths of it, the ones I miss so much it has a taste. The way she hummed in the shower, tuneless, contented. The same 3 or 4 notes that weren't any song, just the private music a person makes when they think no one can hear. The way she'd have my mug already out on the counter next to hers before I came down, the blue one, because I liked the blue one, a thing she never mentioned and never forgot. The way, on cold mornings, she'd have turned the kitchen radiator on an hour early so the room would be warm when I shuffled in, and she'd say, casual, not looking up, "Thought you'd want it warm," as though it were nothing, as though warming a room for someone were not one of the purest things a person can do for another. 50 years of small, unspoken tending, and it all came out in the mornings, in the routine, in the sounds, and I had 3 years of it under my own roof, and I thought, God forgive me. I thought some mornings, lying there, that it would go on forever, that this was just how my life was now, warm and structured and safe. My sister up early holding the day together the way she always had. And then one Tuesday, there was no alarm. I woke at 6:40 into a silence that had a wrongness to it. I felt before I understood it, a silence where a bell should have been, and I lay there waiting for it, the way you wait for the second shoe to drop, and it did not drop. And the minutes went by, 6:45, 6:50, and no bell, no pause, no slippers, no complaining hinge. And I got up and I went to her door and I knocked, and there was nothing, and I went in. She had died sometime in the night, they told me later, peacefully in her sleep, her heart simply stopping the way a clock stops without alarm, and she looked, in the gray morning light, like she was only sleeping, like the alarm would ring any minute and start her up again into another ordinary day. It didn't. I sat with her a long time. The house had never been so quiet. The funeral was small. She'd outlived most of the people who'd have come, and then it was over, and the casserole stopped arriving, and the phone stopped ringing, and I was alone in the house in a way I had not been alone in 3 years. In a way, I realized, I had not really been alone in my whole life, because there had always been Margaret somewhere, in another house or another room, up early, keeping her routine, holding the day together for both of us, whether I knew it. Now there was just me, and my spare room with its stripped bed, and the long, unstructured mornings that no bell divided into before and after. Grief is a strange country, and everyone's map of it is different, and I won't pretend to describe the whole of mine, but I'll tell you the shape of those first weeks. I did not sleep well. I woke early, earlier than I ever had in my life. Woke at 6:40 on the dot, my body still tuned to a bell that would never ring again, and I would lie there in the dark, listening to the silence where my sister used to be, and it was the loneliest sound I have ever heard, the sound of a routine that has stopped. I would have given anything in those weeks to hear that alarm again, to hear the slippers, the hinge, the kettle, to hear her say, "Morning, sleepyhead," one more time. Be careful what you'd give anything for. That's the other thing this story is about. It was a little under 3 weeks after she died that I heard the alarm. I was awake. I want to be clear about that because I've turned it over so many times, looking for the loophole, the way you do. I was awake, lying in the dark at 6:30 something the way I did every morning now, staring at the ceiling, dreading the empty day, and at 6:40 exactly, through the wall, from the spare room where the bed was stripped and the closet was empty and there was nothing left of my sister but the dent her life had worn into the house, the alarm went off. The real bell. Her old wind-up clock, which was not even in the room anymore, which I had packed into a box in the garage with her other things 2 weeks before, ringing through the wall at 6:40 in the morning, clear and ordinary and impossible. I did not move. I lay there and I listened to it ring, and I felt my whole body turn to something cold and listening. And after a few seconds, the ringing stopped, cut off clean, the way it stopped when she silenced it with the flat of her hand, one heavy tap. And then there was a pause, 30 seconds. I counted them without meaning to, my lips moving, and at 30 seconds exactly, I heard the slippers, the soft shuffle of sheepskin across the wood floor of the empty room. Slow, flat-footed, the walk of a woman whose mornings were hard, across the room to the door. And then the door, my door, the spare room door. Its small, particular complaint, the hinge I never oiled, opening. I lay in my bed with the covers gripped in both hands, and I listened to my dead sister's mourning begin in the room next to mine. And I did not scream, and I did not get up, because a great and terrible longing had risen in me that was stronger than fear, a longing that frightened me more than the sound did. Because what I felt, God help me, lying there in the dark listening to the impossible slippers cross to the... She was back. I followed it with my ears, down the hall, the slow shuffle, past my door, close enough that if there had been a person there, I'd have felt them through the wood. Into the bathroom. The fan. The tap. The long running of the shower, the water falling on a plastic stool that was, I knew, folded up in the garage next to the boxed clock. The click of the fan going off. The tap again. The teeth. And then the hall once more, slower, and down the stairs, and then, from the kitchen below me, the click of the kettle switch and the low rising roar of it coming to a boil. I got up then. I could not. I went down the stairs in my nightgown with my heart going, and I stood in the doorway of my kitchen and I looked, and the kitchen was empty. The kettle was cold. Nothing had boiled, but the sound of it filled the room, the low roar climbing toward the click of the switch throwing off, and it climbed and it climbed, and at the exact moment the water would have boiled the sound cut off, and the kitchen was silent, and the empty chair at the table sat where it always sat, facing the window, facing the yard. And I stood there, and I waited. And no voice said, "Morning." I sat down in her chair. I don't know why. I sat in my dead sister's chair with the cold kettle and the empty table, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried at the funeral. And outside the window, the yard went from gray to gold, and the day began the way days do, whether you're ready for them or not. I told the doctor. That was my first mistake, though it took me a while to understand it was a mistake. I told him I was hearing things, my sister's morning routine, every day now, because it was every day now. 6:40 on the dot, the alarm and the pause and the slippers and the rest, the whole sequence playing out through the walls of my house while I lay in bed, and he was kind, and he used the gentle, worried voice, and he told me about grief, about how the bereaved often hear the voices and footsteps of the dead, especially he called them grief hallucinations, and he said they were common and normal and usually faded with time, and he offered me something to help me sleep, and I took the prescription and I did not fill it because I did not want to sleep through it. That was the thing I couldn't say to him. I didn't want it to stop. It was the only time in my day that the house was not unbearably empty. For 20 minutes every morning from 6:40 to 7, my sister was there, going through her rounds, holding the day together the way she always had, and I had come to need it, to wait for it, to lie in the dark counting down to 6:40 like a child on Christmas morning, and a hallucination that gives you back the person you've lost is not a symptom you rush to cure. So I stopped telling people. I let them think I was doing well, getting on, coping the way widows and orphans and lonely sisters are supposed to cope, and I kept my mornings to myself, my secret 20 minutes, and for a while, a few weeks, that was where it stayed. And if it had stayed there, I think I could have lived with it. Could have grown old in that house listening to my sister's ghost make tea and called it a comfort. My daughter came to stay one night, in the middle of all this. She lives 3 hours off with a family of her own, and she'd been worried about me, alone in the house after her aunt. And she drove up on a Friday and stayed the night in the spare room, in Margaret's room, on the bed I'd made up fresh for her. And I lay awake half of it, not from the usual dread, but from a new one, because I did not know what would happen at 6:40 with another living person under my roof, sleeping in the very room where it all began. I lay there as the dark thinned and 6:40 came, and I braced for the bell, for my daughter to come stumbling out white-faced saying, "Mom, what is that? What's happening?" Nothing happened. 6:40 came and went in a silence as complete and ordinary as any house at dawn. No bell, no slippers, no kettle. The routine did not play. I lay there in the quiet and I felt, to my shame, not relief, but a kind of loss, a small, cold disappointment. Because for the first morning in weeks my sister had not come, and I understood, lying there, that it was because I was not alone. That the thing was private, that it would not come, would not perform its acts of love, its bell and its shower and its tea in front of a witness, would not share itself, would not share me. It waited. It was patient. It had all the patience in the world. And my daughter slept soundly in Margaret's room and woke rested and said over breakfast that she was so glad to see me doing well, that the house felt peaceful, and I smiled and agreed, and did not tell her that the peace she felt was the sound of something holding its breath, waiting for her to leave. She left Sunday afternoon, and Monday morning at 6:40 the bell rang, and the routine came, and it came changed. It did not pick up where it had paused. It had moved forward. In the 2 mornings it skipped, further than 2 mornings of its slow growth should have carried it, as though it had spent the silence not sleeping, but waiting and counting and coming closer in the dark. And when it played that Monday, it went straight through the kettle and the chair and the drawer and the milk and the radio and the toast, all of it, faster, surer, and reached closer than it had ever come. As if to say, I waited, I was patient, and now that we're alone again, let's not waste any more time. But a routine is a living thing. I should have known that. Margaret always said so. She said a routine wasn't a cage. The way I'd teased her it was a plant. It grew. You tended it and it put out new growth. It reached. And her routine, playing out morning after morning in my empty house, began to grow, began to grow. The first change was small, and I almost didn't catch it. One morning, after the kettle, after the silence where her sitting down was, there was another sound. A chair drawn back from the table. Not a chair being sat in. I'd have heard the settling weight of that. A chair drawn back and left, the way you leave a chair when you've gotten up from it again to do one more thing. And then a drawer in the kitchen, the cutlery drawer, its rattle, opening and closing. And then nothing. And I lay upstairs and I thought, that's new. She never did that. Her routine ended at the kettle, at the tea, at the sitting. She never got up again to open a drawer. And I turned it over all day. The new sound, the drawn back chair, the cutlery drawer. And I couldn't make it fit. Until that evening, doing my own dishes, I understood. The cutlery drawer. In the mornings, at the end of her tea, before I came down, Margaret used to get up and set the table for my breakfast. A bowl, a spoon from the cutlery drawer laid in my place. Because even at 80, even sick, even with her hands going, she could not sit and have her tea without also getting her little sister's breakfast things ready. Because that was who she was. She was a person who set the table for the people she loved. The routine had grown. It had reached past the kettle, past the sitting, into the part of the morning that was about me. After that, it grew faster. Every few days, there was a new sound, a new act appended to the end of the sequence, and every new act I came to realize with a slow, mounting dread that fought all the while against that terrible glad longing. Every new act was one of the things she used to do for me. The chair, the drawer, the bowl set at my place. Then, a week later, after the bowl, the sound of the fridge opening and the specific clink of the milk bottle she used to take out and stand by my bowl so I wouldn't have to reach for it half asleep. Then the radio, the little kitchen radio she'd turn on low to the station I liked, so the kitchen wouldn't be silent when I came down. Then, and this was the one that made me sit down on the stairs and put my hand over my mouth. Then one morning after the radio, there was the sound of the toaster, the lever going down. And I had not eaten toast since she died, could not have borne to. But Margaret did not know that. The routine did not know that. It only knew that every morning for 3 years it had made me toast. And so it made me toast in an empty kitchen for a woman who wasn't there yet. I tried once to record it. I don't fully know why. Partly, I think, I wanted proof, something I could hold up to the doctor or to my own doubting mind and say, there, you hear it? It's real. It's not just a sad old woman's brain grieving out loud. And partly, and this is closer to the truth, I wanted to be able to keep it, to have the sound saved somewhere, so that on the day they stopped, if they ever stopped, I could still hear my sister make her tea. So one night, I set my phone on the nightstand and I lay awake until 6:39, and at 6:39 I pressed record, and I lay there in the dark with the little red counter climbing, and I listened to the whole of it. The bell, the pause, the slippers, the hinge, the shower, the kettle, the chair, the drawer, the milk, the radio, the toast. And when it was over, I lay there and cried a little from relief, and I played it back. There was nothing on it. 20 minutes of the ordinary silence of a house at dawn. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs. A car passing in the street outside. My own breathing, slow and then catching. And once, near the middle, a small broken sound that was me starting to cry at something the recording had not caught. That was all. The bell had not recorded. The slippers had not recorded. The kettle that had roared through my walls had left no mark at all on 20 minutes of tape, and I lay there with the phone in my hand and the ordinary silence playing back at me. And I understood a thing I did not want to understand, which was that the routine was not a sound in the house. It was a sound in me. It came every morning, faithful and whole and impossibly detailed. But it came only to me, was meant only for me, would follow me and find me anywhere, because it did not live in the walls of the house at all. It lived wherever I was. I tested that too, God help me, because by then some cold, curious part of me had to know. I stopped sleeping in my room. I made up the couch in the living room, downstairs, at the other end of the house from the spare room, as far from the routine's starting place as I could get and still be under the same roof. And I told myself, if it was a haunting, a thing tied to her room, it would play out up there in the empty dark, and I'd hear it faint and far off and be free of it. And at 6:40, from the couch, I heard, upstairs, distant through the ceiling, the bell, and the pause, and the slippers crossing the empty room. And I lay very still on my couch in the gray dawn, and I thought, there, it's up there, it doesn't know I've moved. And then the slippers reached the door, and the hinge complained, and the footsteps came into the hall. And instead of going to the bathroom the way they had every morning for 2 months, they went to the stairs, and they came down. Slow. Flat-footed, one step at a time, the third one creaking, down the stairs and across the hall and into the living room, where I lay frozen on the couch with the blanket to my chin. And they crossed to the kitchen just beyond me, close enough that I felt the air of them, and the kettle clicked on, and the whole rest of the routine played out 10 feet from my head, because it had come to find me, because it always would, because it was not keeping her room, it was keeping me. I went back to my own bed the next night. There was no point to the couch. There was no room in the house it couldn't find me in, and lying awake in the living room listening to it come downstairs after me was worse, somehow, than lying in my bed and letting it come the ordinary way. If a thing is going to walk toward you every morning of your life, it is better, I learned, to let it walk the path it knows. I understood, by then, what was happening, or I understood enough. The routine was not stuck. It was not a recording playing on a loop. It was advancing, morning by morning, growing forward through the sequence of her day, and the direction it was growing was toward me. It had begun in her room, at her alarm, in the part of the morning that was entirely hers, and it was moving outward through the house and forward through the hours, doing all the small acts of love that her mornings had been made of. And every one of those acts was a step closer to the thing her mornings had always been building toward, the thing at the very end, the reason for all of it, the moment she got up from the... That was where it was going. I knew it the way you know the end of a story you've heard 100 times. The routine was walking, morning by morning, day by day, one small, loving act at a time, up out of the kitchen and toward the stairs and toward my door. And one morning, I knew, one morning soon, it was going to knock. And I did not know, lying in the dark listening to it come, whether I was more afraid that it would, or that if it did, I would open the door. The knocking, when it started at the bottom of the stairs, not a knock on wood. Her voice. I'd been waiting for it for weeks by then, dreading it and longing for it in the same held breath. And one morning after the toast and the radio and the milk, in the silence where she used to get up from the table, there came instead the sound of a chair pushed back and set upright, and slow, flat footsteps crossing the kitchen. And then, from the bottom of the stairs, faint, but hers, unmistakably hers, the voice I had not heard in a... I did not answer. I lay in my bed with tears running sideways into my hair, and I did not answer because I was afraid, in some animal part of me deeper than the longing, that if I answered, it would hear me, that the routine, which had been playing out all this time without me, indifferent to me, doing its acts of love for a listener it did not know was listening, would learn that I was there. And I did not know what it would do when it knew. The next morning the voice came again, from the bottom of the stairs. Morning, sleepyhead, and this time, when I didn't answer, it waited. The way she used to wait, a beat, too. And then, the way she used to, it climbed. I heard the first stair take her weight, the particular creak of the third step that I'd never fixed, and the fourth, and I lay rigid in my bed listening to my dead sister come up the stairs one slow, flat-footed step at a time. And at the top she paused, the way she always paused, catching her breath on the landing, and then the slippers came along the hall, closer, closer, past the bathroom, past the linen closet, and stopped. And there was a silence. On the other side of my door, the specific silence of a person standing just outside it, and I lay in my bed 3 feet away with my hand pressed over my own mouth, and the silence went on, and then, soft, patient, loving, exactly as she had said it every morning of my life, my sister's voice through the door said, "Up you get, sleepyhead. Day's not going to wait for you." I have not opened the door. I want you to know that. Every morning now it comes, the whole long sequence of it, the alarm and the pause and the slippers and the shower and the kettle and the toast and the milk and the radio and the chair and the voice at the bottom of the stairs and the slow climb and the footsteps down the hall, and every morning it ends the same way, with my sister standing on the other side of my bedroom door telling me, gently, that the day won't wait, and every morning I lie in my bed with my hand... But I'll tell you the truth, because there's no one else left to tell it to. And because you should know what it is you're really afraid of, on the nights you can't sleep, in the houses you think are empty. I am not afraid of what's on the other side of that door. That's the thing the doctor never understood. The thing the gentle, worried voice can't reach. I am not afraid that it's a monster, that it's some cruel thing wearing my sister's sounds. I'm afraid that it isn't. I'm afraid that it's exactly what it seems to be, my sister, or the shape her love wore, still keeping her routine, still holding the day together for both of us, still coming every morning to wake her little sister because that was the last and best thing her mornings were for, and death did not teach her to stop. I'm afraid that if I open the door, she'll be standing there in her sheepskin slippers with my tea made downstairs, and that she'll smile, and that it will be the most natural and welcome and longed for thing in the world, and that I will be so glad, so unbearably glad, to not be alone in this house anymore. And I'm afraid of how much I want to open it, because I'm alone here, and the days are long and unstructured, and no bell divides them. And every morning for 2 months and more, the one warm thing in my whole gray life has been the 20 minutes when the house fills up with the sounds of someone who loved me getting up to take care of me. And every morning it comes a little closer, a little further into the part of the morning that was always about me. And every morning that voice on the other side of the door is a little, I am worn down. Grief wears you down, and loneliness wears you down, and longing most of all. And I feel the wanting getting stronger, and my resistance getting thinner, morning by morning. The way the routine got stronger, the way it grew. One morning, I am going to open the door. I know it the way I know the sequence, the way I know how the story ends. Some gray, worn down morning when the loneliness has finally outweighed the fear, I am going to get out of my bed when the footsteps stop outside it. And I'm going to put my hand on the knob, and I'm going to open my bedroom door to the sound of my sister's voice. And I'm going to see what has been keeping her routine all this time, what has walked morning by morning up out of the kitchen to my door. I hope it's her. That's the worst of it, a thing I can hardly say. Lying here in the dark, listening to her come, I hope with my whole worn heart that when I finally open the door, it's her. Sleep now. If there's someone in your house who loves you, who gets up before you and holds the day together and waits for you in the mornings, go and tell them while they're still the ones doing it. Go and say it. The routine outlives the person, but it never once outlives the love. And love, it turns out, does not know how to stop, and does not know that it should, and comes, and comes, and comes, and comes, every morning, patient at your door, long after the morning it belongs to is gone. Up you get, sleepyhead. Day's not going to wait. Story 7. The edge of the bed. There is a thing that has happened to me every night of my life. And until I was 34 years old, I believed it happened to everyone, the way I believed everyone dreamed, or everyone's ears rang in a silent room, or everyone felt that small lurch in the body just as sleep takes them. It was that ordinary to me. It was that woven into the fabric of what I thought a night was. And I want to tell you about it slowly, the way it came to me. Because if I tell you too fast, it will sound like one thing, a frightening thing, and it is a frightening thing. But it took me a lifetime to be frightened of it. And I think the slowness is the truest part. Every night, just as I am falling asleep, in that soft, blurred country between being awake and being gone, someone sits down on the edge of my bed. That is all. That is the whole of it, or it was, for most of my life. I would be lying there in the dark, drifting, my thoughts coming loose from their moorings the way they do, and I would feel the mattress dip, down near my feet or along my side, the unmistakable settling of a weight onto the edge of the bed, the way it dips when someone sits down on it to take off their shoes, or to say goodnight, or just to sit with you a while in the dark. A gentle, familiar, entirely physical sensation. The give of the mattress, the slight tilt of my body toward the new weight, and then nothing. No one spoke. No one touched me. The weight simply sat there at the edge of my bed, and I fell asleep every night with the quiet company of it, and in the morning it was gone, and I never once, in 34 years, thought there was anything strange about it at all. I have to make you understand how normal it was to me. When you grow up with a thing, it doesn't announce itself as unusual. It's just the shape of your world. As a small child, I must have felt it and thought it was my mother, come to sit with me until I slept, and by the time I was old enough to notice she wasn't there, that she'd said goodnight and closed the door and gone downstairs, the sitting down had already become so much a part of falling asleep that I never questioned it. It was simply what happened when you went to sleep. The lights went off, and you got under the covers, and your thoughts went soft, and someone sat down on the edge of the bed, and then it was morning. That was a night. That was what a night was. I remember, dimly, mentioning it once as a child, the way children mention things, without weight. I think I asked my mother who came and sat on my bed at night, And I think she said something distracted and reassuring. No one, sweetheart, you're dreaming. Go to sleep the way mothers do. And I think I accepted it, as I accepted everything then, and I did not mention it again. And it went underground, into the part of me that simply knew how the world worked and didn't need to talk about it. For decades, it lived there. Through my childhood and my teens and my 20s, through dorm rooms and shared apartments and my own first place, through every bed I ever slept in every city I ever lived in, the weight came and sat down at the edge, every night, faithful as the dark itself, and I never told a living soul, not because I was hiding it, but because it never once occurred to me that it was a thing worth. You don't tell people that the sun sets. You don't tell them that you breathe. I have tried since to remember the beds, all of them. It has become a kind of private ritual on the nights I can't sleep to walk back through my whole life bed by bed and place the weight in each one, because it was in each one, and remembering where it sat is the closest I can come to understanding how long it has been with me and how far it has come. There was the narrow child's bed with the rail, in the room with the wallpaper of little blue flowers, and it sat at the foot of that one, down by the footboard, a small settling that I must have felt 1,000 nights before I could even form the words for it. There was the bed in the house we moved to when I was 9, and it followed me there, of course. It followed me everywhere, and I remember lying in that new strange room in the first frightening nights of a new house and feeling the weight come and settle at the foot of the bed and feeling, instead of fear, a great relief, because at least that was familiar. At least that had come with me. At least in a whole world of new and unfamiliar things. It comforted me. Do you understand how backwards that is, how completely it had me? In the loneliness of a new house, the thing I now know had been stalking me since my cradle was the thing that made me feel at home. There was the top bunk at summer camp, where I lay awake the first night homesick and afraid until the mattress dipped, and I thought, there you are, and slept. There was the dorm bed, narrow and institutional, where a boy I liked once fell asleep beside me, and I lay there embarrassed and happy and felt the weight settle at the foot of the bed, as it always did, on the far side, past his feet, patient, as if it were waiting for him to leave, and in the morning he was still there, but the weight was gone, the way it always was by morning. There was my first real bed in my first real apartment, the bed I bought with my own first money. And I remember thinking, as I lay in it that first night, proud and alone and grown, that I was finally on my own, finally nobody's. And the weight came and sat down at the edge, and I felt, God help me, watched over, kept, not alone after all. Every bed of my life, every new beginning, every lonely night, and every happy one, and the same gentle weight settling in at the edge, the one constant, the one faithful thing, the companion I never questioned, because it had been there before I had language, before I had memory, before I had any way at all to know that a life was not supposed to come with a thing that sits down beside you every. I found out it wasn't normal on an ordinary Tuesday, in bed, next to a man I had been seeing for about 6 months, the first man I'd ever felt safe enough with to fall fully asleep beside. We were in that drowsy after midnight talk that new couples have, the honest loose talk of people half asleep, and he said something, I don't remember what, about how he could never sleep on his back, and I said something back, and somewhere in the drift of it I said, without thinking, the way you'd mention any small, ordinary thing, I love this part, right before you fall asleep, when you feel someone sit down on the bed. And he was quiet. And he was quiet. And then he laughed a little, the soft laugh of someone who thinks you've made a joke they don't quite get. And he said, when you feel what? And I said, when you're just about asleep. And the bed dips like someone sits down on the edge of it to sit with you. And he propped himself up on his elbow in the dark, and I could feel him looking at me. And he said, slowly, no. I don't know. What are you talking about? I remember the exact moment the floor went out from under my whole life, because I heard it in his voice, the genuine bafflement, the total absence of recognition, and I understood all at once, the way you understand you've been in an accident before you feel any pain. That this thing, this nightly wait, this company I had fallen asleep to every night for 34 years, was not a thing that happened to everyone. That it had never been my mother, or the settling of an old mattress, or the ordinary physics of a bed. That I had been feeling something sit down beside me every single night of my life, and that I was the only one who felt it, and that I had never once been afraid, because I had never once known I should be. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake next to him long after his breathing went slow and even, and for the first time in my life I stayed on the edge of sleep on purpose, hovering there, in the blurred country, waiting, and at some point, in the deepest part of the night, later than it usually came, as if it were shy of the stranger in the bed, I felt it. The mattress dipped, down by my feet, on my side, the familiar gentle settling of a weight I had known my whole life and never seen. And this time, awake inside it, aware inside it. I felt the hair rise on my arms and my heart begin to slam, because it was real. It was really there. Something was really sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark. Something that had been sitting there every night since before I could remember. And I had welcomed it. I had loved it. I had called it the best part of falling asleep. I did not move. I lay rigid in the dark with my eyes squeezed shut because some deep animal instinct told me not to open them, not to look, and I lay there and I felt the weight sit at the edge of my bed, patient, still, and I waited for it to do something, to touch me, to speak, to lean close, and it did none of those things. It simply sat, the way it always had, keeping me company in the dark. Until at last, near dawn, my exhausted body pulled me under despite everything, and I slept, and in the morning it was gone. And the man beside me made coffee and did not understand why I looked the way I looked. I want to tell you the rest of it, the way it happened, in order, because the order is the horror. It did not come at me. It has never, in my whole life, come at me. That is the thing that took me the longest to be afraid of. And it is the thing I am most afraid of now. Whatever sits on the edge of my bed is patient in a way that no living thing is patient. It has been coming to me every night for over 3 decades, and in all that time, it has done exactly one thing. It has sat down, and I have come, slowly, in the years since that Tuesday, to understand that it is waiting. That it has always been waiting. And I have begun, God help me, to understand what for. Once I knew, I couldn't unknow it, and I did the things you do. I told the doctor, sleep onset hallucinations, he said, hypnagogic phenomena, extremely common, the sensation of a presence, of weight, of movement, all well documented, the brain misfiring at the threshold of sleep, nothing to worry about, though we can look into it if it distresses you. And I let him believe he'd explained it, because there was no way to make him understand that a misfiring brain does not sit down on the same edge of the bed every night for 34 years, gently, considerately, the same weight, the same settling, in every bed, in every house, in every city, following you through your whole life like a faithful dog. A hallucination is a flicker. This was a companion. This had tenure. I did a sleep study. I lay in a strange, bright room wired to machines, watched all night by technicians through a camera, and I felt it come. Felt the weight settle at the edge of the narrow clinic bed around 2 in the morning, and I lay there wired and watched, and I thought, now there will be proof. Now the camera will show it. Now the pressure sensors will show a weight where no weight should be. And in the morning they told me kindly that I'd had a normal night, some sleep onset arousals, nothing remarkable. And I asked to see the footage and they let me, humoring me. And I watched myself lie alone in the narrow bed, hour after hour. And at 2 in the morning I watched myself go still and tense in the way I now knew was the weight arriving, and there was nothing there. The edge of the bed did not dip on the camera. The sensors recorded nothing. I was alone in the footage, completely alone, a woman lying rigid in an empty bed, flinching at nothing, keeping company with nothing. And I understood that whatever sat with me was, like the sound of my sister's routine in that other house I'll never know I'm echoing, a thing that came only from me, that lived only in the place where I could feel it and would never, ever, So I stopped trying to prove it, and I started trying to understand it. And understanding it has been the slow work of the years since, and it has taught me to be afraid. Here is what I have learned. It comes every night, without fail. It has never missed a night in my life. Not when I was sick, not when I was traveling, not when I was so exhausted I fell asleep the instant my head touched the pillow. Somehow, in that instant, it is already there, settling onto the edge. It comes only at the threshold, in the blurred country between waking and sleep. Never when I am fully awake, never in the deep of sleep, only there, on the border. As though the border is the only place it can reach me. As though it lives on the border, in the thin membrane between the world where I am awake and the world where I am gone, and can only touch me in the moment I am passing through. And it is closer than it used to be. That was the discovery that turned my understanding from unease into fear, and it came slowly. The way everything about this has come slowly, over years of paying the kind of attention I had never paid before that Tuesday. When I was young, the weight sat at the far edge of the bed, down by my feet, or along the very edge of the far side, as far from me as it could sit and still be on the bed at all. I know this now because I have spent years remembering, cataloging, the way you'd catalog the growth of a child by old photographs. In my childhood bed, it sat at the foot. In my 20s, it sat along my side, at the edge, an arm's length away. In my 30s, it began to sit closer, no longer at the very edge, but a little in from it, nearer to me, near enough that if it had reached out, it could have rested a hand on my hip. And now, in the years since, it has come closer still. It does not sit at the edge of the bed anymore. It sits beside me, right beside me, in the warm space along my body, close enough that I can feel, some nights, the faint sense of it. The way you feel the nearness of another person in the dark, even when they aren't touching you. That subtle pressure of another presence in your own space. Over the course of my whole life, night by night, so slowly that for decades I never noticed it moving, the thing that sits on my bed has been crossing the small distance from the foot of the bed to my side. It has spent 30-odd years closing a gap of about 4 feet, and it is nearly done. And twice, now, it has done something new. For my whole life, it did only the one thing. It sat. It settled its weight at the edge, and it sat, still and quiet and patient, and never once in 3 decades did it do anything more. That was the whole of our arrangement, the terms I had accepted before I was old enough to know I was accepting them. It sits. I sleep. That was all it ever was. Until, about a year ago, on an ordinary night, in the dark, as I lay on the border with the weight settled close beside me, I heard it breathe. A single long exhale. Close. Closer than the weight itself felt. Up near my shoulder, near the side of my face. The slow, soft sound of a breath let out by something lying near me in the dark. The most ordinary sound in the world and the most terrifying I have ever heard. Because in 34 years, it had never made a sound. Never. Not a rustle. Not a sigh. And now, in the deep, the second new thing came a few months later, and it was worse, and I have not been the same since. I was on the border, drifting, the weight close beside me as always, and I felt, for the space of a single heartbeat, a pressure on my hand. My hand, lying open on the covers at my side. Something came to rest on it. Not a grip, not a grab, nothing violent, nothing like the horror stories, only the light, warm, unmistakable weight of a hand laid gently over mine, the way you lay your hand over the hand of someone you love when you're sitting beside them in the dark and you want them to know you're there. It rested on my hand for 1 heartbeat, 2, warm and gentle and real, and then it lifted away, withdrew, as if it had reached out before it meant to, as if it had let itself, just once, just for a moment, do the thing it has been waiting a lifetime to do, and then thought better of it, and drew back to wait a little longer. And I lay there with my hand burning where it had touched me, and I understood that the patience was ending. That after a lifetime of only sitting, it had begun in the last year to reach. A breath. A hand. Small things. First things. the first cracks in a patience that has held for 34 years, and I do not think, once such a patience begins to break, that it breaks slowly. I lie awake some nights now, and I do the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is the worst thing I have ever done. If it has come this far in this many years, if it is now lying, some nights, in the space along my body where a lover would lie, then there is not much distance left. There is not much left for it to close. And I do not know what happens when it has closed it. I do not know what happens on the night it has come as near as it can come, when there is no more edge to move in from, no more gap to cross, when it is fully, finally, beside me. I have never let myself imagine it lying all the way down. I've never let myself imagine it turning in the dark to face me. I've never let myself imagine it doing, at last, after a lifetime of patient sitting, the thing it has been coming closer every night to do. But I have begun to feel that it is almost time. I told my sister, the only person besides that long-gone boyfriend I have ever told, my younger sister who I love and who is always worried about me, and she listened, and she was kind, and at the end, she said the thing that everyone says, that I should see someone, that I sounded so tired, that living alone the way I do isn't good for a person, all the gentle, worried words, and I understood that I had lost her too, that there was no one on the other side of this who could follow me into it, that this was mine, that it had always been, because I've tried to make it go. I want you to know that. Once I was afraid, once I understood, I tried. I tried sleeping with the lights on, and it came in the light. I tried sleeping in chairs, on couches, on the floor, thinking it belonged to the bed, and the weight came and settled beside me on the couch, on the floor, anywhere I crossed the threshold into sleep, because it does not belong to the bed. It belongs to the border, and I carry the border with me into every place I sleep. I tried not sleeping at all, staying awake for as long as a body can, and that was the worst, because there is no defeating sleep. Sleep always wins, and the longer I held it off, the more I began to feel that I was not holding off sleep so much as holding off it, keeping it waiting, and I could feel it there at the edge of every failing minute. Patient, patient. I tried a pill once, a strong one, the kind that takes you down hard and fast and deep, because I thought if I could drop past the border quickly enough, if I could plunge through that thin membrane where it lives before it had the chance to settle in, I might, for one night, one single night, be free of it. And the pill worked. It took me down like a stone, faster than it has ever taken me. And I remember thinking, as I went under, there, I've beaten you. I'm going too fast for you. And I slept the black, dreamless sleep of the drugged. But I woke in the gray morning with the covers thrown back on the side where it lies, and the pillow beside mine dented, and a warmth still fading from the space along my body. A warmth that takes a whole night of another person's sleeping to leave behind. And I understood that I had not gone too fast for it at all. I had only gone too deep to feel it. That while I lay drugged and helpless past the border, past the thin membrane, all the way down in the black where I could not wake and could not feel and could not know, it had come. And it had not sat at the edge. And it had not sat quiet at my side. It had lain down, all the way down, for the whole night, beside me. And I had not been awake to feel it do the thing it does not do while I can feel it. And I have never taken the pill again, because I would rather feel it sit than not feel it lie down. I would rather keep my eyes on the border than be dragged blind past it into whatever it does in the dark when it knows I cannot know. I asked my sister to stay one night, to sit up in a chair in my room and watch me, watch the bed, watch for the dip, for the warmth, for anything, because she is the only one I have left who half believes me, and I was desperate. She sat up as long as she could, and she saw nothing, of course, because there is nothing to see. It has never once been a thing that can be seen. And around 3, she fell asleep in the chair, and in the morning she told me, gently, that I'd slept peacefully all night, that I'd looked so peaceful that whatever I thought was happening, From the outside, it looked like the most peaceful sleep in the world. And that is the cruelest part of all of it, I think. That from the outside, to everyone who has ever watched, to the sleep study camera and the sensors and my worried sister in her chair, it looks like peace. It looks like a woman sleeping soundly, safely, alone. Only I know that I am not alone. Only I have ever known, and I am the one thing in the world that cannot be believed about it, because I am the only one it has ever let feel it. And it chose that on purpose. It chose me on purpose. It has arranged the whole long, patient siege of my life so that when the end comes, there will be no one who believes me, and nowhere I can run, and no instrument that can prove it, and no one at my... I don't fight it anymore. I learned that from a story I'll never know I heard, from a woman who stood in a doorway, from a woman who kept a garden, from all of us, all the ones who learn at last that the patient thing in the house cannot be fought, only lived alongside until it is done being patient. So I have made a kind of peace with it, the exhausted peace of a person who has run out of walls to put up. I go to bed. I turn off the light. I feel my thoughts come loose, and I feel the weight settle in beside me, close now, so close, warm now, in the space along my body, and I lie there in the dark with the thing that has kept me company every night of my life lying quiet at my side, and I fall asleep because there is nothing else to do, because there has never been anything else to do. And in the morning it is gone, and I have one fewer night left before the last one. I don't know how many are left. That's the thing. I lie awake doing the arithmetic of, on the nights the fear is bad. It's very close now. There is almost no distance left to cross. And some night soon, I think, maybe tonight, maybe next month, maybe next year, I will feel it settle in beside me the way it does. And instead of sitting, instead of lying quiet at my side the way it has learned to do, it will finally, gently, after a lifetime of the most extraordinary patience, close the last of the distance. It will turn to me in the dark, and I will feel it do, at last, whatever it has been coming every night since my cradle to do. And I will not be able to stop it, because I never could have stopped it, because it never came at me. It only ever sat down and waited and loved being loved, and came a little closer and waited. And I let it. Every night. My days are strange now, in the shadow of it. From the outside, my life looks ordinary. I go to work. I buy groceries. I water the plants on my windowsill, and I answer my sister's calls, and I am, to everyone who knows me, a quiet woman living a quiet life. A little tired around the eyes, maybe, a little withdrawn since the divorce, since the move, since whatever they decide it is, but ordinary, fine, getting on. No one who passed me on the street would guess that I am living out the last stretch of a siege that began in my cradle. No one would guess that I have started, without quite deciding to stop making plans. That I no longer buy things that won't be used up soon. That when people talk about next year, about years from now, about someday, I feel a small private vertigo because I do not believe anymore in the far-off future the way other people seem to. Because I have felt the distance closing, and I have done the arithmetic, and I know, the way you know a season is turning, that my some days are running short. I catch myself in mirrors, and I look at my own face, and I think, how much longer? I lie down at night the way a person lies down who is not sure they will get up the same, and I have started to say small goodbyes to the ordinary world before I sleep, to the lamp and the window and the sound of the street, small foolish goodnights to things that will still be there in the morning, because I no longer fully trust that I will be there with them, that the woman who opens her eyes will be only me and not me. And it, or worse, I go to sleep each night at the edge of a country I have been walking toward my whole life without knowing it, and I feel it settle and warm beside me, closer than the night before, always closer. And I close my eyes because there is nothing else to do, and I fall, the way we all fall, every night, over the edge of the waking world, and it falls with me, holding my hand now. Some nights for a heartbeat. I'll tell you the one thing I know for certain, the one thing 34 years of it has taught me past any doubt, and then I'll let you sleep, because you should sleep. Everyone should sleep. Sleep is the sweetest thing we're given, and I would never take it from you. Here is the one thing I know. It is not a monster. Whatever sits down on the edge of my bed every night, whatever has crossed a lifetime to come and lie beside me, it is not cruel, and it is not in a hurry, and it does not hate me. It is patient, the way only love is patient, and it is faithful, the way only love is faithful, and it has kept me company every night of my life. And I think, at the end, when it finally does the thing it has been so patient to do, it will do it gently, the way you'd do a kindness, the way you'd help someone at last across a threshold they have been standing at their whole life. That is what frightens me most. Not that it might hurt me, that it won't, that it will feel when it finally comes all the way to me, like the most natural and welcome and long-awaited thing in the world. That I will turn to it in the dark, the way you turn to someone you have loved for a very long time, and that whatever is on the other side of that turning, whatever the border opens onto, I will go to it gladly and glad, and it will feel like finally, after a whole life of nights, not being alone. So here is the only warning I have to give you, and it isn't much, and I'm sorry it isn't more. If you have ever felt it on the edge of sleep, the soft dip of the mattress, the settling of a gentle weight, the sense of quiet company as you drift, then it is yours too. And it has been coming to you all your life, and it is closer now than it was when you were small. I can't tell you how to make it stop. I never found the way. All I can tell you is what it is, so that you'll know, so that you won't spend 34 years failing to be afraid the way I did. It isn't your mother. It was never your mother. Something has been sitting down beside you every night of your life, and it is almost near enough now to lie all the way down. Sleep well. It's kinder, in the end, to sleep well. The nights you have left are better spent sleeping than counting. Good night. I feel it settling in beside me even now.